Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Person You Want to Be. I am your host, Eric Teplitz. Today, I am delighted to have with me as my guest on the podcast, Aleksandra Vančevska. Aleksandra Vančevska is a postdoctoral research fellow at the Francis Crick Institute in London. There, she works in the laboratory of Dr. Simon Bolton, focusing her research on DNA damage response. That is, how cells repair damage to their DNA in order to help facilitate the development of next-generation chemotherapeutics. Aleksandra obtained her bachelor's degree in biochemistry from Belgrade University in 2013 and her PhD in biomedical sciences from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in 2018. In her free time, Aleks is training as a Gestalt therapist at the Metanoia Institute in London, with plans to start her own private practice in early 2024. In her free time, she is the host of a podcast called Being and Doing, and also serves as an interviewer for another podcast, Humans of Gestalt. In her free time, she loves her friends, the gym, singing, traditional dancing, and practicing and teaching yoga. She also has been exploring artistic self-expression through the media of drawing and painting. Somehow, she made time to talk to me today, so I am deeply honored. Aleksandra Vančevska, welcome to The Person You Want to Be.
Thank you, Eric. I must admit there are two things that are kind of sitting with me. One is I'm so honored that you're pronouncing my surname correctly, which is a rare occasion. And I'm really, really happy to be here because I so appreciate the work you put in all of this and just the genuine curiosity you bring to the table.
Well, it's my pleasure, and thank you for that. So, as you may have guessed, I like to start these interviews with a particular question as a good launching point, because it's really kind of funny. You've already accomplished so many different things, and you have all of these wonderful complementary interests. So I really want to dive in and kind of find out how you gave yourself the permission to explore so many different things. So I want to start then with asking you to think back about your childhood. And specifically, what I'm looking for are the first indications that you can remember, the first kind of felt sense that you had of who it was you wanted to be, what it was you wanted to do, maybe what you felt you were here to do, or what you were just naturally drawn to. And if you could also, because your background is really fascinating to me, can you give us as much detail as you feel is appropriate or relevant to give us a context of the environment in which you grew up, where and anything else related to it you feel is relevant?
Yeah, there are several questions, so I'll try to keep on track, but keep me on track if I forget something. It's interesting, actually, the question you asked me, because it's how this painting started. And actually, I didn't know who I wanted to be. I had a feeling who I cannot be, which is a really interesting thing, which is I always felt I'm not creative. And it feels like a lot of my work afterwards is proving myself wrong. And so if I'm going to the first memory of like what I remember of wanting to be something, is that because my dad is a doctor, that I was playing a doctor to my sister. And so I remember in my grandparents' house that we actually had the intravenous infusion kit that my dad was carrying with him.
Okay.
And I would put a toothstick, and then I would put a plaster so that, it mimics that there is a needle, and I would be taking care of her. So I think there was a part of me that had that want to be like my dad kind of thing, because I felt that was important somehow. But I just remember this felt sense of, I want to be creative, but I don't know how. And I can't really name where is this coming from. I just know I had, when I was small, I had this Lego-like puzzle, and you could make anything with this puzzle. But there was an image on the box with the pieces that I was creating over and over and over again. And I was quite small. I was maybe, I don't know, 5 to 7 or something like that. And I even to this day, I remember thinking for myself, why can't I make anything different? Like, why can't I just create this incredible new thing? So I think a lot of my life is about conquering freedoms within me, rather than having an explicit knowing of who I want to be. So it's more kind of a becoming, rather than this is what I'm born to do. But when I do science, I actually do feel like this is what I'm born to do. It just feels, it has such a, I don't know how to explain, science and therapy, both of them in different ways. But when I'm in the lab, I just get so excited when it works. Like, when I do experiments that I know they're reproducible, that they are showing something, that there is a sort of like beauty in knowing that we can control some of the universe and we can understand some fragment of it. And yet the psychotherapy part is more like, I'm working with what we can't control. And I really love that complementarity. So I can't really say that the things I am now are a matter of I knew I will be. They're more a thing of a becoming. And I think now, going back to the question you asked me about the context of my childhood, I think that is actually something that's what shaped this this becoming, because I said this only in my therapy, I think, until now. Maybe I haven't said it online, I'm not sure. But I feel like I lived through several industrial revolutions in like a span of 34 years, because, or no, I'm 32 now. But so I'm originally, my parents are originally from Macedonia, and I'm born in Serbia, but I was spending summer times in Macedonia. And I was born at the time of the beginning of the civil war in Serbia. My dad was a military doctor, which means most of the time he wasn't really home at those times. Just before I was born, my mom had a stillborn, which also means I was born into a kind of field of sorrow. And then all through my childhood up to 1999, everything was enveloped in that veil of war, of inflation, of scarcity, of lack. And 1999, there was the bombing. So we were bombed. I'm not sure what organization, and it doesn't really matter, but there was a bombing. So there was a lot of that. And I think within that, I have had my spaces of freedom, but I am coming from a region that's quite traumatized, and it's kind of carrying a lot of transgenerational trauma, which I then was kind of taking with me. But that's one part of the baggage, if you want. But the other really also quite important part of the baggage, which I think is a privilege, which I don't know if many people have the chance to experience, is that I was born in a country which was almost like there were not many at the time, not many factories. Both of my grandpas, like at least one of them, was an agricultural worker. When I was small, I was using my hands to put a needle on nicotine leaves to make those like kind of I don't know how you call them, but like, you know, when you dry the leaves to make cigarettes, or like to dry them so that you can make them. So like I have a little bit of that, like rural collectivist sharing songs, like kind of sharing things together thing that I don't think many people in this day and age have a felt lived experience of. And I think that really, and also like a lot of the traditional songs and dances I do, they are connected to that. And so it's a privilege to grow there, but then slowly grow out of that and then come into like it almost, I feel like I had to go through 150 years of development to actually live in London of the here and now, if that makes sense. Because only when I came to London, I think I realized, oh my God, the Industrial Revolution in this country has happened in the 1800s. And I was born in the 1990s and I didn't feel it. So like they had 200 years of like getting to, you know, getting the grasp of this. And I had to do that. Like you have 3 years to like wrap your brain around that. Right. So it's quite an interesting journey that like the adaptation of the speed that I needed to adapt from to actually arrive in the here and now. And I don't know if I'm living in the here and now. And there are so many different here and nows for different people. But I guess, I guess there was a lot of becoming in all those processes to get where I am. But I think one thing that I always, and that I have tattooed here, that was always quite important for me is freedom. And I think I was always striving for, how can I get more freedom? How can I be more free in my body? How can I be more free in my expression? And I think it was mostly like, I just have this sentence, learn to express, not to impress. And I think that was my kind of guiding principle. So I often work by guiding principles, but not by goals. I can't predict the goals, but I know what are my values that I hold in my journey. It was a long-winded answer, but there were also a lot of questions. So I hope I answered most of them.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of rich material in there. We could spend the rest of the interview just pulling on threads that came up in what you shared. I appreciated your explanation of what you meant by several industrial revolutions, because you grew up in this one environment that was sort of separated from the developed modern world. And what's cool is that you talked about this feeling like you needed to quickly catch up to 200 years of progress, which is a fascinating thing in and of itself. It's like time travel. But also you bring to your new environment this lived experience that, as you described, is kind of a treasure and has its own things to teach people who have not, who are just so disconnected from themselves, from the earth, from community. That is the nature of the modern developed world, where we're it's such a paradox. We're connected like we've never been before, and we're disconnected like we've never been before.
Actually, that's exactly, as you were speaking, I was like, I didn't say the word nature, but nature is what I was really connected, and nature rhythms. And, and even to this day, I carry this with me. I know the birds that are going to come in the morning. I know how the day smells in the afternoon. I know the feeling of the evening, and there is a sort of slowness that I carry as an embodied experience that I can go to. And I can imagine that for some people who are just born into this immense speed of like now, more, it might be really difficult to slow down because they have no experience of things being slower. And so it's almost like they have to relearn, or like, how do you show to someone what they have never seen? It's like, how do you show love to a person that has never experienced love? And so I think that is something that I really cherish from the region. And like, also, like, there's this image that I carry with me. Like, we have the 1st of May, which is the Workers' Day, but we don't work on that day. And so normally we would spend it by the river, and in the middle of everything, you would have people with, like, there are these special instruments called zurla. It's like wind instrument. And like, people would just come, they would start playing, we would start singing, almost something that you can, I imagine, only see in textbooks. But to this day, I know how to, just like in the middle of a lunch, start a song with my mom, which is something that I really, and it's not like performance. It's just what music is about, which is this sharing, and how we are both musical beings or curious beings, and somehow we put them in professions, but actually they are our birthright.
And that's, therein lies the freedom to sing spontaneously in the middle of the day without it being anything, without anything being required, without and without self-consciousness about it.
Yeah, it's weird. I actually there was a moment when I was in an airplane and I needed to soothe myself, and I started singing. And it was a bit out of my awareness that I did that. But then the flight attendant, she came to me, she's like, "Is everything okay?" And then I started to be self-conscious of like, oh wow, actually, I'm in an airplane. But there is something for me that, the song is not just something I go to listen because, you should listen to classical music. It has such a deep and embodied meaning for me.
So now some people might be listening to this podcast as opposed to viewing it, but you pointed out there's a painting behind you. It's pretty extraordinary, I have to say. And it, to me, looks like the creation of someone who is very liberated and very freed up creatively. So I'd like to know how you managed to tap into that. And again, the word that comes to my mind is permission. Permission to, I had a guest on this show, actually the second episode. His name's Eric Maisel, and he's a creativity coach. In fact, he sort of maybe was the first ever so-called creativity coach back in the 90s. He sort of started this back in the 90s. And in my interview with him, he talks about how we don't have, as grown-ups, and even as once we hit a certain age that seems to be younger and younger now, is that we don't have the permission to make mistakes and messes. And that is the essence of creativity, is you have to allow yourself that permission. So could you speak to what freed you to explore painting? I don't know, how long you've been doing that for, and then also, to the extent that you can, and within keeping in mind that some people can't see it if they're not viewing this on YouTube, can you describe the painting and anything else you want to say about it? But I'm especially interested in what you felt freed you to even create it.
I want to say several things, so I'll just slow down to just see which one I want to start from. Permission and making mistakes. So actually, this is something that I realized this is going to be my life work, because and I am just now going through the process of like, this is going to be my program. This is what I want to teach people, is how we can talk to ourselves while we are making mistakes. Because one thing is making a mistake, and the other thing is, so it's the what and the how, as we say in Gestalt therapy. So the mistake is one thing, but how are we doing it? How are we going through the process of making the mistakes is basically where all the self-development lies. And often the how is basically all the voices that we have acquired through our growing up that are impacting the what. And so I really feel strong about working with those voices. And I think that's where the permission comes in. So the permission is something we conquer, fortunately. It's not something you just wake up and you suddenly have a permission. And even if you give yourself the permission, it might not be as easy as people imagine. Because I had a client who, for example, has drawn something which was quite, it was very free-flowing. It was just like a scribble. And then she painted it, and she got in touch with the fact that whenever she was using the coloring pen, she was afraid that she's going to use it up. Because when she was small, living in scarcity in Serbia during the war, if she would use up her coloring pen, she wouldn't be able to draw anymore. So I think there is a much deeper story in all the times we don't give ourselves permission. So for everyone who's listening, I always love to invite them for compassion and self-care there, because you don't know what's stopping you, and what's stopping you might be quite a difficult, traumatic experience that is often easily solvable, but not if you haven't been.
You have to identify it.
Exactly. And also not if you don't live in a culture where, you're either creative or lazy, or you're either productive or lazy. Like, not if you live in a culture that doesn't support the fact that the reason we are behaving in certain ways always is somewhere in the background, but we don't have support to discover it, to explore it, to get to it. So as with everything I was saying tonight, the way I was conquering my freedoms, like in the smallest bits. Like the metaphor one of my therapists gave me is like, how do you eat an elephant? Like bite by bite, So I think for me, I can tell you when I started. So I grew up in a quite religious, superstitious religious upbringing by my grandparents, not so much by my parents. My dad actually was like quite the opposite, but because I spent like 2 or 3 months every year with my grandparents, I would be like, oh my God, it's the thunders are there. It's like this saint, it's called Svetilia in Serbian. I don't know how it's in English, but like the person that's like responsible for thunders. And so like you must not get him angry. Mm-hmm. Or we had a that was how I was conquering permission. So there is a day of this guy where if you go to a water, you will drown. And so on that day, we were not supposed to take a bath or go to the swimming pool or go to the river, because on that day, for sure, someone drowns. And I think that's where the scientist in me kind of started. So I had that, and I vividly remember like my thinking. I was like, okay, I need to test this.
How old were you?
So, I can't remember. I can't place it, but between 4 and 6, but maybe a bit older. I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. And so I the first year I was like, I will wash my feet. I'll wash my feet and see if the weather changes. Obviously, this is very this is quite mythical thinking, because like those two things don't have to be correlated, and they might be in like all this kind of thing. But it was my small brain. So like everyone who's a scientist, give me a slack for not being perfect.
To me, it sounds like courage. It sounds like an incredible bravery for someone so young and small to challenge this, doctrine from, your grandparents and from maybe, society even at large, right? Like to even have the guts or the nerve to dip your toe in literally is, I think, says something about maybe a spark within you or something that,
I think as you're speaking this now, I think I just didn't want to live in fear. And I remember I was just living in so much fear. Like there was so much fear in like, if you do this, this might happen. If you do this, this might happen. There was so much. like that superstitious fear. Like I remember dreams that my grandma was talking about, and then and I just remember like as if everything can be potential disaster. And also like how you behave, like if you on that day, if you go to the church and have fun, you know what happened, like he sent the thunder and the whole church, everyone died, and like, you know, you're a 6-year-old child and you're listening these horror stories basically. And it's kind of like, so I think I there was a part of me which was like, I cannot leave this life in fear. And I think that was like, you know, like I'll dip my toe this year. Next year, I might just take a shower. And I remember there was a year where I actually went to the swimming pool and nothing happened. Obviously, the problem with that is if something happens, you might live in the worst fear ever.
That's why I said it took courage.
But yeah, so I think that's how somehow it started. Like that's my memory of how it started. But then I think I was always taking challenges. Like I had this, like one next step that I remember was that I was when I went from like 4th grade to like the next level, I don't know how to explain that, like the system's a bit different, but it's just like I changed teachers and we had one teacher, then we had like different teachers for different subjects. And I had like the worst grade in math and Serbian language. And then I went to practice with a really good friend of mine. She was winning competition in Serbian language. And I was like, I need to get this grade better. And I went to her and she was like, you're sitting next to me. That's what she was telling me. She's like, you're sitting next to me. You're like all lost. You don't know where you are. And your question is, how do I get to the national competition? It's like I'm like sitting there, I have the worst grade, and then I asked the question of how do I get to the national competition? And then she said, and I mean, I eventually did get there. And so I think there was always that moment of like, whenever I feel like I can't do something, I try to test that hypothesis and kind of see, is this really true, or is this just my belief about it? And then like movie going forward years until this painting, there are many things that I haven't given permission to myself, but people that are supportive, like my therapists, like the people I work with, are the ones who have given me that permission. And the painting stuff started with a lady, well, actually started with my therapist, because I went to an art museum. And I was like, and I always thought, I'm not creative. I wish I could express myself. And I was in the René Magritte Museum, and he has this incredible combination between surrealism and impressionism. And I was like, this is just like, I want to do the same. And she was like, well, let's just do this simple experiment. Like, close your eyes, take a pen and draw a scribble, and like draw anything, and then just color it. And it's called fractal drawing. And it's actually a method for psychotherapeutic projective assessment, which I didn't know, but now I'm trained in it. And then after that, I found a woman who does it. I've done, you can't see them here, but like, for example, this painting here is like, I have like 18 of them. I've done like a whole cycle, and there is a whole philosophy behind it, how you can introduce new elements in your psyche, how you can introduce in your psyche something you're not used to, how you can play with colors. And this liberated me so much, because I was literally just scribbling and coloring in, and while watching movies. Like it was literally
safe. It was safe. It felt safe.
It was safe. Yeah, it was like, yeah, basically. And so I think that opened up, because I didn't have an expectation that I'm going to draw the next masterpiece. I just did it because it felt good. It was healing. It was therapeutic. And actually, the interesting part about these things is that you can use them actually to self-assess. Now, when I draw, I know when I'm in a trauma space. Like my paintings literally shrink. It's quite impressive. I couldn't believe it when I saw it the first time, but my hand just draws differently, and it's expressed like it's such a projective technique that I was so amazed. So that was what like really liberated me. And then I found this girl. I was just watching her paintings religiously. I was so mesmerized by them. I was like, this is just so beautiful. I want to be doing this. And she's Bosnian. For people, I would like, she is incredible. Her name is Janita, but I think it's Rosaluna Art Poetry. You will find her. And so she had these incredible paintings of women mostly. And I was like, I just want to do this. And I emailed her, and we started working together. And I think there the permission is, so this painting has actually, I will eventually publish that somewhere on my Instagram, but there you will see all the layers. So it's, so the process of intentional creativity is also about the process rather than the end result. And that's what's, again, liberating, because I wasn't aiming to get here. I didn't know that this is where I'm going to get. But it was basically, I just started, and every layer was bringing me an information about myself. So the painting becomes a projective tool again, rather than I will do this to you. And that sounds almost aggression, like aggression, rather than opening up, rather than let's see what this experience of painting will bring me, rather than what I'm going to bring to this experience. And it has to be the way I say it. And so that's something that we started exploring. Actually, the topic of this was creativity and what is my truth? What is my truth? And it started by me just writing down something about me. Then I got to know, and it's something interesting. I mean, you can't see my other painting, but sometimes the paintings show me things that I only get to know afterwards. So almost like as if I see myself before I have a conscious knowing of what's going to come up for me. And I think that's the most amazing part of this process, that you really use it as a tool for self-discovery and for self-expression, rather than as impression. And so basically, just to say to people, what's the end point? What's now at the image? So it's called United Kingdom. And there are two colors. So on one side is the red, and then the other one is kind of turquoise blue. And that was another interesting part of the process. I discovered a new color for me in my palette. I by accident I mixed my blue and green and white, green and white, and it became turquoise, which I didn't expect. It was such a beautiful color. And then I realized, isn't this amazing? Like, you know, if you go to art school, you would need to learn this by heart. And it would be such a bore to do that. But now, like, I have an experiential knowledge that if I do this, you know, this is the color I can get. And so then I'm not afraid of mixing. You know, I'm not afraid, because what if I don't get the right color? But you won't, but you might get something else. And I think that's, again, what is liberating. And so it has these two parts. And for me, the United Kingdom is about uniting the feminine and the masculine principle within me. And that has been my life process, actually. I have been both of my sides were quite wounded, I must say, both the masculine and the feminine. And that's why I really think I can work with both men and women in my practice, because I had to heal both in myself. And the expectation, the societal patriarchal expectations I had for the man inside of me and the woman inside of me. And I think so there is a tree here, and the tree was actually about connecting with my roots, but truly connecting with my roots, and also pruning them a little bit. There was a moment where this painting, I think you will be able to see that in the video I will post, but there was a moment where a part did not have roots. I deleted them, and then I added them back again. And so you know how we do that to plants? We prune them, we clean the roots. And I think we need to do that with our lives. We need to clean those roots. We need to find a way to work with our past, that's not invasive, that is just supportive, because that's the way the energy will flow better through us. And I also think this is like a never-ending process. Like, and that's another thing I learned through this painting. And I just love that. So you start with a blank canvas, and that's what I'm grateful for my parents giving me. Like, that's our life. That's what I've given. That's what I've gotten from them. Like, you have this blank canvas
of being alive.
Of being alive, exactly. And I think what I've noticed is that because, you carry over the history in every new layer you make. And I think this is so representative of life. And you can choose the pieces of history you carry. You can remove the pieces you don't like. You can rewrite the story. I mean, if I want tomorrow, I can repaint this painting and choose new parts of this painting. So it never ends. And I think it's the same thing, like we were talking, that Derek Sivers connected us, and he has recently published an incredible piece about, I think, history is not true, or I don't remember exactly the title, but his memory of something being completely not true. And I think that happens to us, but we live our lives as if that is absolutely true, without checking those assumptions, without checking those memories, without pruning our roots, without like looking back and seeing what we are carrying, without looking at our beliefs and seeing what's inside of them. So I think this painting in that sense is, like, to me, really rich, that it's just like a metaphor for life in so many different ways. And then you can see on the one side, on the masculine side, it's quite linear. So like there is no circle. But then on the feminine side, there is like, they're connected and there is like a circling. And so I think that's something that we carry. Time is linear and circle at the same time. And we need to hold that paradox. We can't, I mean, it's not like one or the other. It's really both. Yes, we are going to die. Yes, there is an end. And yes, there is a cycle of life. And so, and it's really hard to hold those things, both of them, in the same time. And at times we can't. At times we can hold only one or only the other, because it's just safer, nicer, easier. I don't know. So yeah, there's that. And I think, and there are some, I think, small symbols that they mean something to me, that I don't want to get into now.
Sure.
But and there is the sun and the moon again, as a you can't see it here, but there is again that Jungian of this female and the male principle, and they're together in a way that I think we are always together in these things. And I don't really like the separation that is kind of split of like men, women, or yeah. So that's about this painting, and then just that giving permission, and actually just want to name like Janita, who was guiding me through this process. It was incredible how gently I was guided through it, and she, like, the worst moments was when she asks you, now repaint everything you did until now. And that's a moment where you actually get in touch with your own aggression, with your own destructive nature, and seeing how that destructiveness can be useful as well to create something new, something different. But she was very gently supporting me when my hand was shaking in doing that. And so I think I wouldn't have been able to do this on my own. And I think that's another thing I've learned from my culture, the interdependence. And I don't think I can be where I am without all the people in my life that have supported me. And that's something that I emphasize again and again and again. I appreciate my own agency in everything. Of course, I always asked for help. I always reached out. So definitely that's important, to reach out. But sometimes there are people that, you're on the floor, and sometimes you don't even reach out, but they're there. And I think I kind of really cherish people in my life, and all of them that supported me until now. And I think that's what given me permission, knowing that I'm backed up by some incredible people, including my parents. So yeah, again, a very long answer, but you asked.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, there's again so many things I can follow up with you on. First, for starters, just the word mistake, right? It's a label. It's a label that we give to something, but it's just a way of seeing something that happened or something that you did. And as you pointed out with your art making and with the painting, and I was inferring that when you were talking about layers to the painting, you were describing that the painting looked one way and then you painted over and created a new layer. Is that right? Is that what you meant by layers? Yeah. So a mistake, a quote unquote mistake, if we can view that instead of using such a harsh and like kind of damning label.
Yeah.
And this is hard, by the way, but I'm just throwing it out there. You know, if we can instead view it through the lens of process, I had to do this, make this quote unquote mistake in order to become this, or in order to realize this, like you did with the new color that you discovered accidentally. And, and science is all about discovery, and mistakes throughout scientific history have been the key to like some of the most important discoveries. So it's this, I think it's this relationship we have with the notion of mistakes. And even just that, again, the label is so charged, the word is so charged with negative connotation.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting. There is part of this painting, it's near the eye, and I don't know, I genuinely don't know how there is this one, you can't see it because it's very tiny. There's like a tear at the edge of the eye. And I genuinely don't know how that ended up being there. It was not a conscious process, but I know exactly what it means to me. On one hand, there is a star next to the male part, and there is a tear in the female part, and I know exactly what that means in the context of my family. None of that was there intentionally. You can call it a mistake, but that had such a deep meaning when I ended the painting and saw what came out, that I was happy to make that mistake. But I think there is something about making mistakes in a how do you say, in a healthy way, and negligence. And I think that that's something that I always try to, I am all for mistakes, and I do not support negligence. And so that's where I'm
that's a great distinction. Yeah,
like it's a tough one, because you don't know, you don't really know. Sometimes they are indistinguishable. But I think that as long as we do stuff with some awareness, then we can spot when we have made a mistake. But if we're negligent and we're constantly doing things in a bit of like unaware way, or then it's not that, then it's a process of more like not really being careful of yourself and of how you impact others. And so I think that's something that I always try to distinguish also for myself, especially like because I work in a lab, and science is something that taught me how to make mistakes amazingly. Because I mean, science humbles you every single day. And I wish, I mean, this is just, I'm saying this out loud more for myself, not for the audience, but I do wish I stay at the bench as long as possible, or at least always have a moments where I work at the bench with my hands, because every time you do experiments, you realize how difficult it is to actually do good experiments, how many variables there are, how difficult it is to control all of them, and how challenging it can be. Your cells suddenly are not doing anything because this has changed, or like, sometimes the water has changed, the water supplier has changed, and suddenly none of your experiments are working, and then you need to get a step back and just notice, like, let's do this kind of step by step to see what's having problems here. So science is, in that sense, is really I think it taught me a lot about making mistakes and learning from them. And I think I'm still learning. I'm still honing my skills as a scientist, although I have been quite long in science, like I think 15 years now, but it's still a process where I find myself sometimes being more negligent than making mistakes. And I think there is a part, like, yes, when you leave something. I mean, today I just had a discussion with my colleague, and she's like, I have this magic thing here. A PhD student has prepared 8 grams instead of 0.8, and it actually works better for all cell types. But again, there is a difference where that student actually knew the mistake was happening, and that didn't destroy the experiments of others. So there is a part which I think is like, the prepared mind can see this, but if you never practice this, then I think it becomes just negligence.
Wow, that is such a rich topic, because as you say, it can be such a fine line. Context is everything.
Yes.
And I like this idea of, when you're doing science, the need to control, to make sure, for instance, that all the conditions are the same when you're repeating things, or you're trying to replicate or confirm something you think is going on, right? Like you have to really like control everything, and you don't even know, sometimes are aware of the things, the effect you're having, or again, so many different variables that you may not even be aware of, versus the process of painting or art making, where instead of control, it's more about surrender.
Yes.
But it's a both and, isn't it? Like, there's a need for structure and free expression. There's a need for like containment and liberation.
Yes.
Like it's this paradox of seeming contradictions. But that is a really interesting point of discernment, the idea of making mistakes versus negligence. I'm going to have to think about that deeply.
I mean, to be honest, I just came up with it. It's not something I had but I just have a felt sense that there is something about there. I mean, I haven't developed it but I think especially in science, it can be quite visible when you can see, and the easiest way for me is like, well, if we've done this 3 times and it works the same all the time, well, then it's fine. Like, then it's just what the experiment is showing. But if we do it 3 times and every time we see a completely different result, well, then we really need to ask ourselves, what did I do? Like, what's something that I'm doing or the environment is doing, or so there is that kind of, I think it's important that not paralyzing doubt, but doubt is quite
healthy skepticism.
Yes, exactly. I had a thought on something you said, but now I'm lost it. Maybe it will come again. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
So no need to apologize. That's happened to me at least 12 times. This idea of feeling like you're not creative and yet yearning to be, I bet a lot of people can identify with that. And one thing that I'm interested in hearing you speak to is, you talked about with that painting is a process, or can be a process of self-discovery, and that it can reveal things to you about yourself that until you see it in front of you, you're not even aware of. And there are so many unconscious things, events, our histories, our intergenerational histories. You talked about the aura. You talked about that sort of like, I think of it as like your childhood was, in a sense, like the context of it was this deep sorrow that was like present through everything of this. And what was interesting to me was you had said 34 years and you said, no, wait, 32, I'm 32. But if you think about the stillborn child, and I heard you say elsewhere that this happened 6 months before you were conceived. So that would mean roughly 15 months before you were born, 34 years.
Yeah.
But certainly, like, there are so many things, some of the things we can dig and discover and realize are impacting us. But we can't ever really be conscious of all of it. And especially when you consider things that happened before we were even born that we may not even know about, and that are, we may never find out about. And so what this, a subject that comes up frequently in this podcast is this notion of, for lack of a better way of putting it, nature versus nurture. But it certainly seems to me that there are so many forces that are impacting us, like, to such a huge extent, that the interesting question to me is, where is the real freedom, the real agency? We think we're doing things of our own volition, and yet there are so many antecedents to every behavior and every aspiration that we have that inform them, and we think we're acting freely, but really, and we can't know, we can't really distinguish this. But what I'm going to just wrap up this rambling with a question to you about self. Do you believe that we discover ourselves in life as we live through it, or do we create ourselves? And I would just love to hear you speak to that in whatever way comes up for you.
I have so many words to say about this, but let me slow down again. I just need to bring this in. I was thinking about this podcast, and I realized it's the first time I give myself permission to talk about everything I love and everything I know. So I don't think anyone has ever read my biography in the way you did, or I don't think I have given my biography to anyone that in the way I've done to you. And I think there is something about the trust I have in you holding this conversation. So I do really want to answer this question, because it's something I have been thinking for a long time, and it might be, again, a long answer, but I'm giving myself the permission.
Hey, go for it. We have no sponsors. There's no ad breaks, and there's no time constraint. So go for it.
Yeah. So actually, I just had a podcast with a lady from Serbia, and she asked something similar. And so in the places we grew up, a little bit of the Eastern culture, like the Turkish, we even have, we have a word for destiny, but it's something that's quite strongly embedded in our culture, that you can't escape your destiny, that everything will happen as it's like, it's written in your stars. And I think that breeds a little bit of a fatalistic attitude to life, which is like a learned helplessness. You lose self-agency, you lose this ability to make your life the way you want it to be. Versus, I think, the current culture I'm in, I will call it West, but I think, to be honest, it's in all of us. But yeah, for the simplicity, I'll call it West, is this absolute agency of complete
self-determination, individualism.
Exactly. I am absolutely determined by myself and anything I choose. And this is how it's going to be, and I have impact on anything. And I think that is another extreme, which is incredible. But then it can get to an extreme again, which is you can punish yourself so much for not getting somewhere and not being able, without realizing that it's so much more complex, and you're embedded in a system, and there are so many constraining forces. And actually this lady, she said an incredible thing. She says this is a really good way for the system to absolve itself. Because in a way, then the system has no responsibility, then it's all about you. So
I see what you're saying. Yeah, right. Yeah. And there's there are certain political points of view that would say it's all up to you, you determine everything, bootstrap yourself, blah blah blah. Exactly. And then there's another political point of view that says everything is a result of the system in which you're born into, and that you can't change unless the system changes, and both of them have their merits and their flaws.
Yes. And actually now I got the thought I had as you were speaking last time. So I really like so we were talking about self-expression and control, and so Esther Perel she says that life is not a problem to be solved, but a set of paradoxes to be experienced. And I think, again, coming back to Derek Sivers and the book which was which we discussed mostly in the podcast I did with him, was the 27 How to Live. Yeah. And I loved what he did. He went into those extremes and he explored the polarities. And I want to introduce here a Gestalt concept, but I think it's a Buddhist concept. But polarities. There are polarities in life, and we operate within these polarities. And it's not either or. We just need to hold the tension of them. And I think this is what I'm learning through experience, is that we will always be on that sliding scale. And I think what's wrong, I mean, you can call it wrong, but what is the challenge, and what we in psychotherapy call a fixed gestalt, or a fixed way of being, is when we have no access to the other polarity, where it feels like we are trapped in a certain way of being, and there is no way for us to access this other way. And so I think, and that's why I think what happens is when the split inside is so strong, or like when we are so strongly fixed in our way of being, then the polarity will appear as another person. And that's how we get a split in a society, is that when we disown a part of ourselves as like, this is not self, not me, then it will appear in a form of a person which will embody those polarities.
Can you, if you don't mind, can you give a specific example, maybe from your own life, if you're so brave?
I can give you a specific example. Well, I can say like why I was attracted to certain things. For example, I never thought I was funny. I don't know why, but I always thought like, yeah, I'm super serious. I have no funny ways of being. And so I kind of disowned that part of me that's humorous and kind of lively. And then I found a partner who was basically embodying a clown mentality. He was always there to entertain. He was always the one who was being funny. And I think I chose him to learn something from that, to get into that polarity of like, how can I be a bit reckless, a bit less controlled, a bit like, and I think often in choosing partners, I think it's the easiest place to see why do we like someone? What is it? And especially I know Teal Swan is controversial, but I quite like some of the things she says.
Who is this?
Her name is Teal Swan, but
I don't know who that is.
I mean, I really like some of the things she says, but there is a really good video on attraction, and so for everyone who wants to understand more, I think her video is just absolutely incredible. And I think and I think we can discover so much about ourselves by looking at what we are attracted to in others, what we value, but also what we hate. And these are concepts that we have them in so many languages. It's the Jungian shadow. It's all these kind of things, but it's always about what is the polarity that I can't access in myself, that I'm searching for somewhere in the outside world. So yeah, that's one example. And I think that's why the more we can hold that tension inside of us, I think the less and the more we grow as humans, as like nations or countries, I think the less of conflict we will have, because the conflict is often primarily internal before it becomes external.
And the external is a reflection of the internal.
Exactly. And so I deeply believe that if we somehow manage to work on that process in ourselves, somehow the external conflicts will become less and less. But I think we really need to build slowly a culture that has this education, I would say, that we grow up with that knowing that that's part of our upbringing, that it's what what kids are growing up with, rather than, you know, you need to come to like me, like being 30 with a divorced and an abusive relationship, that, you know, you get to start to know that. and actually many times I just find it amazing and quite sad that I was like, there are so many incredible books that are written in the 70s or 60s, that, you know, if you read them, you'll just find this information. But then like somehow it was not in my field, or I was not ready to see it. And I'm like, imagine if this was talked about in my school, maybe I would recognize that some behavior was just not accepting or bullying, or
but maybe, but to your point, some things are best learned, unfortunately, or fortunately, experientially, and we can't always, there's a difference in absorbing something intellectually versus experientially, and sometimes the only way to internalize something is the hard way.
Well, to be honest, not sometimes, most of the times. I mean, I actually now I really enjoy, so the Gestalt therapy training I'm on, it's very experiential. So to the point that I often read the text after we finish the weekend rather than before, because I don't want to pollute the experience with the ideas I have of it. And I think, and I have been always an experiential learner. I mean, I admire people, and there are some scientists and some of my really close, amazing friends who are just so able to sit with a book, distill everything, apply it momentarily, and just go for it. And those people I just find absolutely fascinating. I absolutely cannot do that until I seriously fuck up an experiment. I just, it can't. I mean, I'm now better at doing like successful experiments for first, like just because of experience. But it's just like,
well, it's a deeper learning too, right? Because the stakes are probably a lot higher. If you've paid a price for, you know, to use that word again, a mistake, that loaded word. But if you pay a price for something, it's going to make you think twice the next time in a way that just reading about it will not likely, you know, have that kind of effect. So there are so many things that I'd like to ask you. So one thing that I'm really interested in to talk about, because growing up in America, and specifically where I did and when I did,
can you say more about it? Like where did you
grow
up?
Yeah, I grew up in Philadelphia on the East Coast, and in the 70s and 80s. And where I was going with this was in terms of being multilingual. So from what I understand, you're fluent in, I want to say like 6 or 7 different languages. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say fluent in 4 or 5, but knowing 6 probably. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm like massively impressed with that. And but some of that, I'm guessing, at least some of it, is a function of, it just wasn't something that was it wasn't valued, and it wasn't emphasized. And also just pragmatically, you know, in Europe, the countries are so close together, different languages, like it's more necessary or pragmatic or easily applicable to have that facility with different languages. And so we had a language requirement in school, so I did learn some, but I'm interested in hearing what the role of the role of language in your development. So if you could speak to the languages that you grew up learning. I guess sort of what I'm asking is, when and where did you encounter the different languages you've learned? How much of that was a function of upbringing and context versus your own curiosity and initiative?
So, well, that's interesting because I'm not sure how to answer it. So I was born bilingual because my parents were from Macedonia, and I grew up in Serbia. And so Macedonian and Serbian, they are like a dialect of like they have similar roots. They are South Slavic languages, but they are different, as in like they have different phonetics and the way they you pronounce some of the sounds. So I did have to have a bit of adaptability in that sense, and especially the closer they are, it's sometimes even more difficult to separate them. But there was something about the way I am. And my mom, she says this story, she calls me like a mobile phone operator, that I changed my language as we passed the border. So that's what I was doing. So I would I would be quite small, and so we would pass the border, and I would just switch to speaking Macedonian, or like switch to speaking Serbian. But then, for example, my sister was exposed to more or less the same thing. Having the 4-year difference meant that my parents started speaking more and more Serbian home.
Your sister is older or younger?
Younger, 4 years younger. So she might not have been fully exposed in the same intensity as I was, but she does not speak Macedonian. So, you can say that I was more permissive or not, or it was just the time she was growing up where my parents, or she just reacted differently to the language, or she didn't want to come to my grandparents, so she refused to learn the language. So it was something about, it can be different things. But for me, language, the way I learn languages, and that's something that amazes even myself, because I don't really, so I learned them as a music song. So I just let them impact me. And the more I'm like, it's almost like if I'm in a certain pool of stuff, I get shaped by that pool. Like pool as in like swimming pool. Like somehow if I'm immersed in for long enough, my body is permissive. I'm quite sensitive, I guess. I mean, I a lot of my therapists have said I'm highly sensitive. I don't identify it with labels, but probably there is a sort of sensitivity, I think. And so for example, I learned Spanish by listening to Spanish telenovelas as I was studying in my room. So I have never had a class of Spanish. I can read it. I'm not as fluent because I never had a chance to like fully practice. But I can read, I can listen to episodes. I can, I mean, if you would put me in a Spanish speaking country, I would need a month to adapt. But it was just because it was just, and that's something I think, I don't know, all of our brains do, but I think mine has more of a permission to do. So for example, there was so it's like languages are me like a pattern recognition. And so the more I see something being repeated, the more I can associate what it means. And so it was a really funny thing. I remember someone was showing me a map of, I think it was like somewhere around Thailand or something, I don't remember. And it was Pulau something. And then my brain was immediately, Pulau is on every island. And I was like, Pulau must mean island. Like it's written on island and it's repeated for every, So I think, and then we Googled and actually it was that. So I think that's something about the way I am, like just the way I'm built, that it just has this quite quick pattern recognition and association. And I think that might be part of my feeling safe and my trauma, as in like, that keeps you safe. I mean, if you can scan the environment,
the adaptability,
really like because I mean, like one of my first science teachers, she was always saying like intelligence is adaptability. And so I think I'm really quick at like scanning the room, seeing and then like that somehow. So I think that's how languages work for me. And it's interesting, French, I learned it at school, so I'm really horrible, as I said, having rules, following them and remembering them. So if I am to learn like that, I don't learn. So I was learning French in school. I could not speak it. I could not read it. I was like having so much trouble. But then when I went to Switzerland and I lived there for my PhD in the French part, I wasn't really speaking it at the time. I knew the grammar and everything, but I was not really like, it didn't come out. I was translating from Serbian to English to French. It was so slow. It was very frustrating. Then suddenly, because I was immersed in it for 4 years, I came to England and I started to make a call I needed to do some administrative thing, and I started speaking French as I'm completely fluent. And I was like, what is this? So I think there is something about it's specific to me, and I imagine there might be people who could relate to this, that is just about being immersed in something and just having enough time to do the pattern recognition bit. And then English, I learned because my parents were like, this is a really good investment. And I actually that's the only language I had private classes in. And I had an incredible teacher, which I actually want to name because his name is Aleksandra Vančevska. And he brought the English learning in a very fun way. So you always felt like I'm not really learning the rules.
It was more like play?
It was more like play. So if you want to teach me anything, make me play. I will learn it much faster than if you tell me the rules. So I think this is basically how all the languages come to be. And then the more you know, the easier then is to make connections. And especially because I was competing in Serbian literature, I think there was a part where I learned a lot about the structure of languages. And I think that also helps me. Because I loved linguistics, and I loved how we were like learning for the competition. We were really had to know how do you form a sentence, what are the pieces of the sentence, all like this. And I mean
the rules.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that helped me. That helped me to have like a basis, which now is just like an embodied feeling, but at the time it was just like a very awful and dull thing to do. But yeah, I think that's another basis which I quite like. I have quite a classic education, which I'm very grateful for. And I don't think I realized that until I came out of Serbia, how grateful I am for the education we got there. Because my high school was really incredible because we learned Latin, we learned English, French. Then we also had like really good, very strong courses in chemistry, in math. So you would have almost like all the classic subjects really deeply, like almost like kind of university course level. So the education in Serbia is something, and I think Russia is like quite good in that as well. It goes into the logic of things. It's not only about how things are, but it really goes deeply into the logic of how things, and also the teachers are trained. I mean, this is the Serbia I lived in. It might have changed.
Well, it sounds like it was a cultural value, a strong one.
It was a very strong, I mean, I think that's part of communism. That was a part of communism. That's how you were making people equal, by giving me and honestly, like, many people hate communism, but we had equal opportunities. So there were many horrible things, which I don't want to normalize, but there was something about, again, polarity. There's something we can learn from that, and we shouldn't shy away and like completely negate it, because I mean, honestly, it did help. And yes, my parents were educated, but their parents, my dad is a doctor, my mom is an economist, but my mom's mom and dad were like, only my grandma was working and she was a seamstress, and my dad's parents, like they were both agricultural people, and I think my grandma was a cook. So, they had the chance that, if the education is so privatized and the more you pay, the better education you get, my parents would not stand the chance. I wouldn't be where I am now. And so, you can say a lot of shitty stuff about communism, which I have the right to speak because I lived it. But I think there are some things we also have to acknowledge, because it was an experiment. Every system we make is an experiment. And I think, especially because we had such huge scale experiments, why can't we just learn and we don't need to repeat the same experiment and make gulags, but we can take the good pieces of it and just so I think there is a part of that was also part of my culture, which I'm quite grateful for.
Again, 16 follow-up questions, if I can even remember half of them. So, all right, first on the language piece, and then I want to get to speaking a little bit about communism and capitalism. So the language piece, you said that as a very young kid, it sounded like. One thing that was so fascinating to me is that you learned from your parents Macedonian and Serbian, correct?
Yeah.
But you had this instinctual sense of which was which. And when you described that you would cross a border as a kid and instantly switch and know. So that's to me pretty fascinating. But my first question with regard to that is, as a kid, how did you distinguish between, if you're learning both languages, what was your way of distinguishing which was which? Was it one parent was teaching you one, speaking to you in one versus another was speaking to you in another? How did you know that they weren't the same language?
I have no answer to that question, because I just know that I always knew. I knew that the Macedonian was spoken in my family, but my family friends were Serbian and therefore were probably speaking Serbian. In the small town I grew up. So I think that there is probably a chance of, in the social environment, I would be exposed to Serbian, and then my mom would sing and speak to me in Macedonian, and my dad. And I think my mom and dad at the time when I was born, maybe not when my sister was born, were speaking Macedonian to each other. But I think I had, and this was probably like, I only remember after 4 years. I don't remember my first 4 years of life. And so I think afterwards, like, if I was 4 and then I was like maybe going out with kids and then going a little bit to the kindergarten. And also that I think my mom said, actually, I don't think I knew when I was really, really small, fully, because sometimes I would mix them. So my mom, now I remember this, it's a kind of a funny story she always tells, that I had a lady that was babysitting me. And I would say I can't translate this in the language, but I can just kind of give you a sense. It's like, I want to pee, but in Macedonia, in Serbian, the same thing would means I want to soak something in, So I was saying I want to pee in Macedonian, but like the lady was, but what do you want to soak? I don't understand. So I think I didn't have I think probably when I had the cleanest cut connection was when I was like 5, 6, 7. But probably as I was growing up, is that, how kids learn, and that's about mistakes. That's to me is like, how there is this wonderful video that sometimes circulates Instagram, that there is this dad and he sits next to his son, and then he's talking to him, and the boy is kind of repeating the same sound, not the same sounds. He's not saying words, but he's kind of talking, and the dad is taking him seriously. But he's like, I see what you say, I understand. And so what do you think about this? And the boy is like, but he's kind of, it feels like he's speaking, but he's not. And I think this is how we learn. We kind of position ourselves, and then we fumble, and suddenly it's the right word. And suddenly it's,
and when it's reinforced, we know it's right. Like if we get the result we're trying to get, or we get the recognition, the understanding. This is so fascinating. Also, you mentioned your parents sang to you in Macedonian. I wonder if that helped you distinguish between the two, or I think that music is so powerful, and that's a whole other side conversation we could have, but in terms of so many things, but learning included, that I've noticed, for instance, that if I have to memorize a lot of text, it's really difficult. But if there's a tune to it, I can do it with far more facility and ease. So
that's interesting, because we have a joke in our family that we listen from Silvana to Nirvana, and Silvana is like a really bad, like not really bad, really good singer, like folk singer in Serbia, but like the span is
a range,
and I think, and actually I have videos of me when I was baby, and that's what I appreciate, like things that I'm on, like this is like the best thing, because my house was full with music quite a lot of times. And or at least it's a memory I have. It might not be true, because I also have other memories, but at least on the videos,
Hmm.
there would be music, anything from like opera to like XU music, to Greek music, to Macedonian traditional music, and I think I was just immersed in so much richness,
Hmm.
that I think that really shaped me. And I think because all of that was somehow valued, I think it was also culturally valued somehow. Although there was this, I think also the type of communism Yugoslavia had was slightly different to some extent. I mean, I also know quite horrible stories of really good friends,
Hmm.
but there was something about diversity which I find quite amazing. Although unfortunately we went into ethnic cleansing afterwards, but that's a completely other story. But I was brought up at least with a lot of diversity, and not a diversity of religion though, but a lot of different kind of diversities.
Okay, so I'm remembering a thought that I had way far back in this conversation when you were talking about superstition, and you said that your grandparents had a sort of religious superstition orientation or superstitious religiousness,
Yeah.
and it made me think, and I never had thought about this before, but that superstition likely stems from trauma.
Oh, absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
we'll let this conversation go for another time, perhaps on religion itself, which is a fascinating subject. And but I just made that connection during our exchange, and I thought, well, that is so interesting.
Yeah.
Um, and it's out of our desire to control
Yeah.
things that are scary. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I know that that was off the track that we were on, but so oftentimes we have no idea, we don't really fully appreciate or understand our context until we're in a different one,
Yeah.
because we just assume that that is the norm. For instance, like I've heard celebrities, the children of celebrities being asked, what was it like being the son of or the daughter of so and so? And to them, it's like, I didn't know any differently. Like, that's all that I knew. It's like, there's no
Yeah.
way to know, like, isn't that everyone's experience? Or not that they necessarily thought that, but I think that we are so blinded by our context and the pool that we're in, right? That we don't know what's outside of that pool. We don't really know how much of who we are and what we are, and maybe who we aspire to be, to get to the theme of this
Yeah.
podcast, comes from that. So this is you grew up in a communist country, and you said it was sort of a specific type of communism, and I'm sure that there are many different experiences of this depending on time and place. And then you have lived since in Switzerland and in the UK, as far as I know, maybe other places as well, I don't know. But what, given your background, what observations do you have personally of, let's say, the communist society and culture that you were raised in versus the capitalist societies that you've experienced firsthand for yourself? This is sort of open-ended, but I'm just interested to hear what you have to say about it.
So I want to say something before, because I remember it from the previous
Yes.
conversation, but it slightly relates to what you're asking or what you commented on about the normal. We are growing up the norm, and then how when we go into another pool, it's suddenly. I think there is actually, and you asked me, like, we talked about self-agency, and so Gestalt has a concept of selfing, as in, you asked me whether we discover ourselves or whether we are becoming, and I kind of like that idea of selfing, and I have like an image of interconnectedness, and I don't know, like we talked about Tim Ferriss before we started, like you are the average of the 5 person you are surrounded with, like something that he often repeats as well. And I think it's really true. I mean, we are always our environment. And I do believe there is and that's again holding the polarity. I do believe there is a core, and I do believe we are selfing at the same time. And so there is both, I think, somehow. So yeah, I just wanted to add that. And speaking about communism, capitalism, I must really I must like
It's
say
charged, I know.
I first want to say these are like very naive
Mm.
views of someone who has been born at the cusp of the end of the communism in Serbia. So basically, I think so Tito died, I think, in 88, which was the leader, the communist leader. And probably everything started falling apart in 91. And I think we all I at least have grown up in a very romanticized version. And one of the interviews that will come up in my podcast with Vesna Goldsworthy, she spoke to this. She says, I catch myself often having this idealized view of the time we lived in, but if it was so good, it wouldn't have fallen apart. And not only that it wouldn't have fallen apart, but it wouldn't have fallen apart in such a horrible way. So I really need to kind of boundary myself in making big conclusions. And I think what I definitely can speak to, I can speak to both what I gained and I think what I lost. And I think what I gained is, as I said, this very classic education and the ability to access it, because my studies were free. Well, they were free if you pass an exam, but they are free. So that was one big thing, that maybe if it was not free, my parents would not have had the money to get me through school. Or I was stipended. So stipends are quite a big thing in Serbia, especially for people who are competing, or so I think that was, and then knowledge becomes like quite distinguishing characteristic. You can I don't know, that's why I think I have a deep connection with it, because that's how you can get forward in life somehow. And it's rewarded, let's say. And I think there was also something about, there's also again something about community, that I think it shows when people have a common belief and a common goal, you can really bring them together. And so many people have built roads in Serbia, and just out of their free time and in community spirit. And many people remember that. I wasn't part of that. I mean, it was all long gone before I left. But honestly, I lived, so when I was studying, I lived in a very tiny student dorm where it was 7 meters square for 2 people.
Now this is with what part of your education are we talking about?
It was university.
University. And is this the science school that I read about, that you went to a science school? I don't know the name of it.
No, that was
before university.
But that was a high school science school. Yeah. So this was the university part in Belgrade. And I think that's, there is something about, we would spontaneously, everyone had a skill there. And I have a really good friend. He's the one who actually does the music for my podcast now.
Okay.
And the audio, he would bring his guitar. We would sit in the evenings and just sing all together. We would be there and exchange opinions, and it would just be and it was 7 meters squares. I don't know if people can imagine this, but it's really tiny. And you end up really hating each other, because it's so hard. I mean, it's so hard to live sometimes in
close proximity.
That close proximity. But I think there was something about that. This is a shared life experience. Our sorrows are shared. Our successes are shared. And so I think, and we are just sitting there in an absolute heat, 38 degrees, we have our feet
Celsius for those.
Sorry.
Okay.
Forget that. And so there is something about shared misery and shared celebrations, which I really carry as part of my, let's say, experience. And then I think what communism really did not leave me with, which I started to only appreciate when I came to capitalist systems, is there is a level of agency you lose because you expect the state to give you stuff.
Mm.
And you expect that that's a given, but you kind of forget, I forgot at least, and only now, I mean, I'm the true how to say, not value, but the true worth of things, as in, like, you know, people don't really know how much truly, if you would charge it as it is, you don't really know how much like a medicine costs. From, like, you know, the scientist like me that's there researching it for 10 years, through the companies that need to put the effort into all the other stuff to, like, it eventually getting on the market. You know, it took me to come to a capitalist country where this unrecognized work or like is kind of now recognized, and you need to pay extra, you need to make sure of it, you and I think it gave me a little bit of agency, because that it just pushes you to constantly question the system you're living in, and not taking it for granted, and starting to also know the value of things. And, you know, because sometimes I guess when people are expecting to get like a good doctor or something, they might be like, well, like, you know, I just expect him to always be there for me, like, without needing to respect his time and his efforts. And
so a certain entitlement.
Exactly. And I think that's so and again, I think that's what I learned with coming out of like coming into the capitalist system, because there is nothing is really for free. I mean, and some things are, I mean, as in, like, yes, nature gives a lot of the stuff for free, but like we still need to travel to the place where
harvest it
so I think that's something we may forget if, you know, if you're long settled, nice, comfortable in your society, which has now organized everything, and you don't need to see the background work which needs to take for you to actually take the apple and like eat it. So I think that's really what coming to this system has taught me. And again, like, now you can also see the drawback of that, because you can inflate prices, you can play with that, and suddenly there are hierarchies, and there's productivity and all this.
Everything. This is
Everything.
so interesting how complex these things are. I mean, it's so easy to have sort of knee-jerk reactions and conclusions, but there's so there's so many nuances, and there's there's the unknown unknowns. There's the things. Absolutely. There's the things we're just not even aware of. So I always, as I get older, I come more and more back to humility.
Yes.
Right. Like just
day.
Trying to appreciate. And again, I'm sure I'm nowhere near there enough, but just this increasing realization of how little I know and understand. And we can get very self-righteous about things. And I'm not saying that there isn't a place for that, but just this awareness of how much I don't understand, or of whatever I know about something is just a fraction of what there is to know. And so it helps me to an extent. And again, I think I've made progress at this. I'm not saying I'm any sort of master in humility, but it's a direction that I've been moving in as I get older, of realizing more and more how little I know and understand.
Can I ask you then, like, what has helped you, or what are your moves, or I don't know what the proper question would be, that kind of brought you into that state of
humility, in the direction of increased humility? Life experience, thinking that, being quote unquote certain of something and then being proven wrong over and over again, or maybe
is there anything specific that particularly shaped your?
Oh yeah. For sure. Well, probably the most significant thing, since you asked, is, in my younger days, I had this sort of single-minded focus on music as an all-consuming pursuit, and I was very determined to be a professional musician and for it to be my livelihood. And did I want to be rich and famous? Well, sure. I think that is very much a part of the pool that I was swimming in growing up. But at the same time, again, complexity and nuance and mixtures of things and both ands. I wanted glory and I wanted fame and I wanted recognition for sure. That was part of it. It wasn't the only part of it. I genuinely adored music from such an early age. I mean, it was to me like the most magical thing in life. Like just the most like for me, I don't know how I would have gotten through my teenage years without music. Like music made me feel less alone, made me feel understood, allowed me to feel whatever I was feeling. So sometimes deeply sad music was extremely nourishing.
And I just want to add, it's interesting that you're saying music, but it's actually the musicians who have done that.
Yeah, the artists. Yeah,
it's very funny. It's like how often we depersonalize because there is so much about the genius, and I'm really like my hair goes up when we speak about that, because there is something about it's the people who access that in themselves that help us to access it in ourselves. But somehow, like once it's out, we forget the people. And
I don't forget. I mean,
it's not about you, but
yeah,
I just picked up on the language.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, I was speaking music just to be more like the broad stroke and general about it, but obviously there were specific like musical heroes that I identified with or that touched me so deeply that I wanted to emulate. Well, the Beatles were a massive, massive. A lot of people, maybe some artists you haven't heard of. I don't know. Harry Chapin, who was a singer-songwriter, had a huge impact on me, and he had a storytelling style of songwriting. So his songs were almost like mini movies, a lot of them, and they were very very typically had a lot of emotional punch to them. Of his the characters in his songs would suffer deeply or get hurt by life in profound ways. And it was just very moving. His stuff is very moving. But there's a million. Paul Simon, Billy Joel. But I also like the more music. I also loved classical. I got interested in more types of music and styles of music and different musicians. Like as I went further in and deeply and got exposed to different things. But those were some of the ones that were big inspirations. There's a lot, trust me, there's a lot, but and it was very personal. Oh, so anyway, just to answer your question. So essentially I put forth an incredible amount of effort. I was really determined. I really believed, like, I didn't necessarily think that I was some kind of musical genius, to use that word that you used. But I sensed that I'm good enough at this, and I'm good enough, and I'm willing to work to do whatever like it takes in terms of effort. Like I'm really willing to put myself out there. I'm really willing to give it everything I've got. And I probably internalized this belief from my culture that if I just work hard enough, I will succeed at what I want to do. So that was the belief, that it was a strong conviction that I had, and it served me well to a point. So I felt like, well, the short version of it is I kind of drove myself to a nervous breakdown by the time I got to my mid-20s, where I had just put everything that I possibly could put into this ambition, both creatively and in terms of trying to get a career off the ground. So, and those are two very different things. But I wanted to, like, my definition of success would have been both, and it was a high bar. My definition of success was, artistically, I have to feel like I've done the best that I possibly could do creatively, and be really proud, like not just do stuff because I think it would be popular or people would like it, but Not, I mean, I wanted them to like it, but I had to create music that I felt was of a certain quality and that stretched my abilities to their basically their limits. And then commercially, my goal really was just to be able to eke out a living doing it. I would like, would I have accepted more than that? For sure. But I wasn't like deluded about it. And I wasn't, like I understood the difficulty of what I was trying to do. And I understood that the odds were, stacked against me. Just in terms of like, everybody wants to do this. And, it's, there's so many factors that are not in your control. So many things. But I feel like I'm rambling on way too much with this, but the short answer though, is that I really did believe that it was just a matter of effort. And so I gave it everything I could until I was in really, really, really bad shape, really exhausted, physically, emotionally, just like spent, like nothing left. And in one sense, I was proud of that, like knowing that
it means you're a true author.
What's that?
It means that you're a true artist, like.
Oh, well, struggling artist. I mean, there's a whole mythology about that, but no, it was more just like, I really knew that I gave it everything I had. And there is a certain satisfaction in any endeavor when you really know that you've done your best and you really have given something everything you can give. But the problem for me was that just about my entire sense of identity and sense of self-worth was tied up in this identity that I had created, like, for myself. No one else was insisting on this for me. But I was insisting on it. And so when it kind of blew up in my face, I had to really withdraw. And I guess it was a deeply, deeply humbling experience, to say the least. Right. And that's how it's relevant to the question that you asked, where I realized, well, and for me, like the big lesson was, and it's so obvious, but again, to my point earlier about sometimes we have to learn things experientially. We learn them the hard way before they actually sink in. And the big lesson for me was I had to learn that my overall well-being actually has to come first before anything else. Like, if I don't attend to that, then there's nothing else. There's nothing else that's possible. Like, that has to be the first priority before anything else can be. And I was so obsessed with like succeeding on the terms I just described. And the stakes were so high because I felt like it was the only way I could be happy, and the only way I could validate my existence and feel worthwhile. I mean, it's ridiculous when I think about it now, but I really, really did, I think, believe those things. And so coming to the point of having to understand that my well-being had to come first, that I had to learn to love myself, that I had to learn to like myself, that I had to learn to be okay, that I was okay, an okay human being, even if I didn't achieve this massively difficult thing to achieve, where all the factors were not in my control. Anyway, so that was probably the start of my movement in the direction of humility.
And humanity. Yeah, that's interesting. So who are the person you want to be? So who are the person you want to be now?
Who's doing this interview?
Well, I said I'm going to ask
you
questions.
did before we started. Yeah, no. Who is the person I want to be now? Yeah, it's a great question. It's an ever evolving thing. It's not like I had set it up initially, like, this is exactly, and with perfect clarity, like, this is exactly the person I want to be. I want to be a successful, but by my own definition and standards, singer-songwriter. I wanted to make a living doing the music I wanted to make. It's very oriented, like, I wanted to do my music on my own terms. I wanted to write it, record it, and perform it. And I wanted to make a living doing that. And that was the person that I wanted to be up until, up until nervous breakdown time. And ever since, it's been a real journey of exploration. And I'm still figuring it out. I don't have a nearly as clear an answer as I did in the first half of my life thus far. So, yeah.
Actually, I was thinking about the answer to that question. I was like,
because it's coming.
yeah. Actually, that's the only thing. I watched one interview and I was like, I don't want to watch more because it's going to lose the spontaneity. But that question is the only one I kind of had, I thought about, and I was like, actually, the person I want to be is I want to be do everything that's within my capacity at any given moment. If that means doing 10 things at this time because I can, then I'm an artist, scientist, podcast host, and a Gestalt therapist. That might not be my capacity in 2 years. And then I might be just a scientist or just a Gestalt therapist. And then that capacity might expand. And so I now think more in terms of, I want to be everything that's within my current limits.
Wow. And I have to say, it certainly begs the question, just given all of the interests that you have, and not just have, but are actively exploring. And by the way, so I, discovered you through your podcast, Being and Doing, and you do a phenomenal job. And one of the things that I love about your podcast and about podcasts in general that I love is being introduced to people and ideas that I didn't know of prior, right? Like that's one of the coolest things. And I hope, like, one of my goals for this podcast is to provide that service to other people, that they'll discover Aleksandra because of this interview, for instance, and that will change their life, or at least like it'll give them a rabbit hole to go down that who knows what it might lead to, but it could literally change their life in a positive way. And that's the hope, like, by following my own curiosities and my own sort of passions and enthusiasms. And if I put enough things out there into the world, that they will provide some inspiration to other people the way I've received inspiration my whole life from not just musicians, but, oh my God, so many different right? So many, podcasters and writers and musicians and all kinds of people. But
so actually, I wanna add, because I resonate so much with what you said, because that's how I started the podcast.
I wanted to ask you, how did it come to be? I know that you started it with a friend, but I want to know the whole story. So go ahead.
So actually, again, coming back to Tim Ferriss, as I was doing my PhD, which involved a lot of microscopy, which meant a lot of sitting and imaging, and like 10 hours of that in a black dark room. So like you're like, if you get crazy if you don't have anything to listen to. And I just admire scientists who have done this before the era of having the ability to put something in your ears. But basically I've listened to, as we discussed, almost every episode of the Tim Ferriss podcast.
And how many are we talking about, just for those who don't know?
Probably
hundreds.
300.
That's a lot.
Yeah. And
how did you discover him specifically? Do you remember?
Good question. I have no idea. And I think I stick to him because he was annoying me. And it's very interesting because I'm all against this hyper optimization, which now he's changing his mind about. But I really thought he was an incredible interviewer and very curious. And I was so annoyed, but I kind of stick with him because he was quite spontaneous, and there was something about that. And so I have no idea how I discovered him. Totally no idea. Probably like YouTube showed him one day, and I stick to him. I have no memory of it. And basically, as I was listening to him, and this is something that I think you are speaking to, and that's another thing, again, communism, like what changing countries meant to me. When you are too much in a system, you get sucked into the collective narrative, collective unconscious, the assumed stories that are never questioned. And I think that's one thing that I love about traveling and living in different countries, is that you swim in another pool and you realize that normal temperature is not normal anymore. And as I was listening to him, and then I started listening, I think, to Joe Rogan, and I think I was listening to, like, there was this whole, like, it was, I don't know how they call them, the dark corner of YouTube, like Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson, and this conservative guy, I don't remember even his name. And they annoyed the shit out of me. And especially because they were all calling each other into their podcasts. That it was
it was sort of incestuous, right? Like all the people, they appear on all of each other's shows.
And that creates a huge collective unconscious narrative that new voices cannot break through and bring new ideas. And that's unhealthy, really, for a society to constantly have millions views of people saying the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. Some of them develop and grow and evolve, but some of them are just repeating the same stories, and some of them are honestly just quite toxic. And so there was a part of me which I adored. That's how I got to Derek Sivers, because it didn't feel like he was like, I like that Tim was also bringing a little bit of novelty, but there was still something about, like, if you're famous, I'm going to bring you here. And I always really I really wanted to, I had incredible friends with incredible stories that are really intelligent. They don't have the space to talk about themselves, or they, like, they're not deemed successful by whatever standards of society. And I think I really wanted to break that collective unconscious, to be like, I'm going to bring these people out of my curiosity because I value them, and I think their stories are going to be valuable for others. That is a big risk, because that means that, like, I won't be able to have like million viewing, because it's hard.
Who knows? Well, it's hard. I mean,
you
even
never know.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big unknown, right? But I identify with your desire to champion people whose work and or life you want to give voice, you want to amplify, you want to share, like you feel like you're in on all these little secrets and you want to share them with the world in the form of these amazing people. That's what I've been doing. Yeah, exactly.
And that's why I said I quite resonate with you. And I think and that's not to say, I mean, as I said, like, I interviewed Derek. I would love to interview. We discussed this. Like, I would love to speak to Tim, especially because he was like, I stole questions from him. Yeah. Like, I've listened to everything, like, he said about, like, how do you set up your podcast? Like, I just appreciate, I mean, if you're listening to this, I don't know if you will ever listen. Thank you for being you, for putting all that out there, and for providing resources for people and giving encouragement. And I actually listened to your first episode. So she's speaking to Tim, for those, just to be clear. But no, I love that first episode, because I just love that experiment of, like, that's actually about making mistakes, and I think he was quite brave in doing that. So I think I always knew I wanted to do it. And then there was a moment where I was not sure what's going to be, so I have been carrying that idea. And also, like, I'm a person of dialogue, as you could see. Like, I can't not respond to a person. So I love teaching, but teaching is not my preferred way of being, because I want to know, how is it what I'm saying impacting you? What is it awakening in you? How can we create something bigger than me and you? So I think that's something that I always knew. And so I felt like I really want to do this to be able to connect. And this is another layer, which we again discussed, be connected to Derek Sivers, is I was amazed that he just invited people to email him just because he's curious. And I was like, well, I wish I have that platform to do the same, because I am curious about people's stories. And so I was then realizing, well, I can probably create that platform somehow. And then for a long time, I wanted to do it with my ex-partner. And then somehow I realized that was not his wish. And I was kind of stopping myself from doing it because he didn't want to do it.
Huh.
Then like when I came to London, like London was a liberation. That's why it's United Kingdom. I gave myself the permission is the word you used. I cut my hair. I mean, now it's short, like I had it like all the way to my to my butt basically. And so I cut my hair. I give myself permission to do things I never thought I would do in my life. Like I never thought I would do them there. And so the podcast was always on my mind. So I got the mic. I've listened to Tim Ferriss's stuff, but I didn't know how to call it. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have any idea. And so a friend of mine, Amy, who is an incredible artist, actually, we met in a London flat, and it was Corona time, and she was basically, I adore her because and this is where people are so important, because she, you know, when you're starting an idea, it's quite fragile.
Oh, sure.
It's like a seed that you need to protect for some time, until you kind of feel ready. And she was the first one. I got that. She was the first one. She interviewed me. That interview is not out, maybe one day, but she interviewed me. I interviewed her. She actually brought a lot of the good questions. So some of the questions are actually from her. It started as we are going to interview each other as we are successful, because why do you need to wait to be someone who has money and fame to actually be able to share your story? And then we also talked about success as something as fashion, as, you know, what's fashionable today in success might not be fashionable at some other time. And then we like after that happened, we had a brief the next day, and I was like, oh, we need to do this together. And then we kind of we thought, and she named it. So the being and doing is coming from her. It's actually coming from our conversation, and this is how many of my programs are formed. I speak to people that listen well, and they reflect back to me in one sentence, what is it that I want to do? And being and doing was what she reflected back to me. And it was like, I just remember it was such a wonderful day. There was sun, and like, you know, we were being talking how to be and do at the same time. And so that's how it started. And then she was like the next day she came to me and she said, Alex, actually, this is your dream. Like, I think, and I love her for that, because she knows her boundaries, and she didn't get pulled into something that was my projection, my dream, and it was truly my dream. And so I took it off, and I started interviewing people as soon, and that's something, it's really interesting about me. I have this thing, it's cooking, and once it precipitates, I skyrocket, because I know exactly what I want to do. But I learned how to allow the cooking to happen long enough until I have the feeling that's it. That's what I was looking for this whole time. And it's just like, it's almost like, and then it's there. So that's how it started. And then there is a branch, Being Human and Doing Psychotherapy, which actually came from the humans of Gestalt. Again, talking to Heather.
Okay, let's back up. Hold on. Yeah. No, I love this. I love this.
Yeah.
I love this for so many reasons. But for those who don't know about these other podcasts, so it being
they're
and doing
all on my page, so it's not like they're not so separate. But
but so you told the origin story of Being and Doing, and by the way, I just wanted to be sure to follow up. Did you interview Amy? Because I don't, if so, I haven't seen that.
I did. It's not published, but I think that will depend on Amy, but I hope it will.
Sure. Okay, but that was the first interview that you did.
Yes.
Okay, and then Being Human and Doing Psychotherapy is sort of a spin-off of that, right? So some of the and now talk about Humans of Gestalt. And by the way, I feel like I need to back up a little bit more, even, because you got this PhD while you were in Switzerland, and there's 1,000 questions I could ask you about how you chose to go to Switzerland and how that all came about. And I know that you had an adopted Swiss family that was very dear to you. And that's a whole series of questions we may or may not have time for today. But what I want to know is, first of all, for those who are unfamiliar with this term Gestalt, we need to define our terms. But even before that, I want to find out where your interest in psychotherapy began, because you were already on a career trajectory.
Yeah.
So speak to, if you would, and if you could do it, maybe speak to the following things, and then I'm going to let you just have the mic.
Yeah.
I want to know about how you got interested in psychotherapy, how you discovered Gestalt psychotherapy, and for those who don't know what that is or means, if you could explain it, define it a bit, and how it differentiates itself from maybe other forms of psychotherapy, others, right? And then the Humans of Gestalt podcast, how you came into contact with that project, and when that also coincided with these other podcast projects that we just talked about.
So I'll try to be brief. So the interest in psychotherapy, it's difficult to describe because I just remember reading these things since ever. Like I love the book The Road Less Traveled. I read Freud. I read Fromm when I was small, high school, and Dostoevsky is basically, I interviewed the millennial therapist, and we came to the conclusion that was our first therapist, because he is like a stream of consciousness writer. So it's all about the really deep, and I think it's also something that in our culture is like not really talked about. So you like, you know, the way you found music where you can actually experience something that was maybe forbidden somewhere else. I think was like that's what the books were for me. Because
explain.
Well, for example, like, you know, you read Dostoevsky, and the way he writes, like he's so good at verbalizing how someone is feeling. For example, I can give you a very precise example. As I was reading Crime and Punishment. Is it Crime and Punishment?
Crime and Punishment, yeah.
Raskolnikov, yeah.
He gets into his head.
Yes, exactly. And there is a scene when he admits to his girlfriend, I don't know her name, that he has committed the murder, and she screams and falls on his feet. And I remember the moment I read the way it was described, I made the scream. And I think there is something about these writers being able to write so thinly, so delicately about the inner experience that was really attractive to me. And in that science school you mentioned, I actually did go and do 1 year of psychology. But I think maybe because I don't know why I never felt that's like that I can be both. I mean, I did psychology and I did biomedicine, and I learned like how you research in psychology and like biomedicine. But to be honest, to me, they are inseparable. They always were. It's like mind body are a thing. So I always had that interest, but I never knew that could be an option for me, because in Serbia, actually, I think to be a psychotherapist you need to study psychology first, and so I didn't know that was an option. I didn't know any psychotherapist really. I always knew I had something I'm carrying as a pain. I always knew that, and I think I was always searching for finding ways to deal with that. So I did have like my first therapist when I was maybe 22. She was a psychologist, but it didn't really go. She said, well, you're okay. Like, you know, you don't have real problems or big problems. So that was a bit, it kind of stopped me there. But when I went to Switzerland, I started working with another therapist. And I mean, I discovered some bits and pieces there, but when it really hit, it was when I came here, and like my whole relationship, to London, and like my whole relationships fell down, and it was a lot of difficult, like humbling experience, to use your words. And so my sister was working with a Gestalt therapist at the time, and she just described how it works. And she's like, he often asks me, where do I feel it? How do I feel about that? So there was something about the bodily part that got me attracted. And I was like, please give me 3 numbers of therapists from your therapist that I can call. I can interview them and see which one feels good to work with. And that's what I did. And I was, again, another person I need to name is Ivana, is my therapist, and I think she changed my life. And she was the one who, I think, having the experience that you can do Gestalt as a trainee, she was like, why don't you train? I don't even remember the moment. I need to re-listen to some of my sessions, but I don't remember the moment when I made the decision, but I just felt like, yeah, it's not a question even. And then I did quite I had to do a course, a pre entry course and stuff. So that's how I entered Gestalt. But actually, before I entered Gestalt, my therapist was giving me all this books, information, materials. One of them was the Humans of Gestalt.
Podcast.
The podcast.
And explain, because I don't know I fully understand what is the genesis of that podcast. From my limited understanding of it, it seems like there are a variety of interviewers.
Yeah.
And there's like this whole community of people. Like, explain it.
Yes. Yeah. So that's that. So basically, I got in touch with the person who has started that through the Being and Doing podcast, because I was amazed by what she was doing, and I interviewed her.
Who is that?
That's Heather and Keys.
Okay.
And you
so
can
did you interview her on Being and Doing?
Yes.
Oh, yes. I haven't seen that. Okay.
Yeah. She's I think it's in the audio only, and so that's maybe
okay. Okay.
Yeah. And because our internet was breaking, and so I couldn't use the video, but basically I loved that the idea for her started was like, there are so many great therapists, we don't know their oral histories, we meet them at conferences and we don't keep them in our memory. And she has done these video recordings at conferences at times, but then she was like, well, then Corona I think started, and then she was like, well, why don't I actually record these things? And so that's how I don't know the other girl who she started this with, but I think it's a Polish girl, and they I think came up with the questions together, and it's about the lived experience of the therapist plus how they got into Gestalt and what that means to them, and where do they think the Gestalt is going. And just to backtrack a little bit, what is Gestalt?
Mm-hmm.
It's such a difficult thing to describe. It's one of those things like psychedelics. Until you try it, you don't know what it is. So that's why I won't spend much words on it. I will say that there are several pillars of what Gestalt is about. So it's been started by a married couple, the Perlses, and they were in South Africa at the time, I think, or Africa somewhere. They were war refugees, I think, and then they came to the US, and that's where it boomed. But it actually has quite scientific background, because the lady Laura Pearls, she was a PhD, and she has a really, really good philosophical classical background. And I think Fritz was a doctor, but I might be mistaken. And some of the foundations are the phenomenological approach, which actually as a methodology of exploring reality is a valid scientific approach, which is we explore the reality with how is something, with questions like we don't measure it, but we are going with those surface questions.
Do you mean subjective experience?
Exactly. And so, I mean, I'm probably horrible at explaining this, and I will interview a person who knows a lot about this. But one of them is we are really trying to get to the gist of how is this for you? What are you describing? So it's all these questions where it's not meaning making, but it's really, let's stay with what is and not try to put a meaning on it.
No story, just the felt experience.
The felt experience. And then the next pillar is experimentation, which you can imagine why that attracts me. And I think so I have a really good book, which is called Risking Being Alive. And we really can't have new experiences until we're ready to take that experimental risk. And the therapy, the way we do therapy in Gestalt is we try to create a space of what people call safe emergency, where you can take risks that are not overwhelming, but you can still have a new experience. And that's why the process is quite slow. And then dialogue is one of the pillars. So it's very relational. It's very about what is this between us? What are we co-creating together here? Not like you're the patient, I'm the doctor, I know you don't. It's more like what's in between us? What are we co-creating here, and how are we doing that? And then I probably am missing one pillar, but I can't get to it. But all of that together, and body process. So like there's a very famous saying, which it can be also criticized, but it's lose your mind, come to your senses. And I think there is something about, you said, being in a culture where we are really disembodied and very, very
in our heads.
And so I think so that part really attracted me, because I feel like I'm quite an embodied person, but also at times I tend, obviously, like that's my job, to be very analytical. So all of that makes Gestalt. How does that look in the therapy room is so unique that you can't, as I said, until you try it with a certain therapist, which, like, I as a Gestalt therapist might work in a completely different way than a person like that's training with me, and we are trained more or less in the same way. So I think that's the beauty of the humans of Gestalt, because it gets into that idiosyncrasy, which I love. Idiosyncrasy is my favorite word, and I think we need to use it, and I think we need to remember as a polarity to just averaging everything. And I think, idiosyncrasies are beautiful, and that's the richness of life to me. So that's a little bit about Gestalt, but I'm happy, like, if anyone wants to email me and ask questions, I'm happy to answer, and just watch the videos or and so basically Heather started that. And so I interviewed Heather, and then because she, there are interviews in different languages, and I really hope if, someone wants to fund us, that we can actually pay translation of this, because I think it's so rich, because at the moment it's only in those languages, but you can't know. I mean, if I don't speak Russian, I wouldn't be able to listen.
Yeah, well, and in my case, listening to your podcast, I could only sample the English speaking ones because a lot of them were in Serbian, and I'm sure they're great, but I have no way of understanding them. There's no English subtitles.
Really, it's just like money and time, really. It's just money and time. And it's just so annoying. I feel so gut-wrenched that I can't do anything about that. But I mean, not for now, but I will get there. And so, so basically, so now that's how I approached her first. And then at one point I was like, well, I would love to interview Gestalt people in Serbia. And that's also for me a way to learn. To learn about, like, as I'm learning and studying, I can study. I love to study oral history, and I think it's much better way, because you have a sense of a person. You don't learn it from the books, but you don't idealize people. That's the most important thing to me. I never had an idol. Like, I always
really,
I think
really.
Yeah. I mean, I'm lying. I had scientific idols, and I was badly disappointed.
Oh, because did you meet them? Is that why?
Yes and no.
Or you were disappointed when you learned something about them that was like
For example, I can be very explicit, actually. Okay. So Watson and Crick. I mean, the most incredible discovery, they stole it. They just stole data from Rosalind Franklin. And, people can say, I mean, there's nothing that excuses going into someone's lab, opening a lab book and looking at their data. It's not okay.
And you now work at the Francis Crick Institute.
Yeah, I have problems with that as well. But
paradox.
But I think there is those things when, I loved the book. Actually, that's something I'm almost ashamed of, that I loved it. But the Watson book, now I don't remember, but it was about the double helix. I think it's called the double helix. So yeah, so I did have, unfortunately, yeah. But I think I really like that when you can have what we would call a whole object relations and know someone's, amazing things they've done, and also like the background, and also being able to work with both, because I do still believe in a wholeness of a person, and I really appreciate when someone is a great professional but a great human as well. And so that's it's quite an important value for me. And so basically that's why I started interviewing in Serbian, but then because I live in England, I interviewed a lot of the English Gestalt community, people from the English Gestalt community. And we are Heather is quite nice because she's very flexible in that sense. And then she was the mother, or like the godfather, I don't know how to say it, like, she gave name to being human and being human and doing psychotherapy, because I said to her, can I interview people from different modalities, because I am also like I don't like to be boxed. That's like my thing. And
I understand. I agree. I can relate to that.
So basically, and she was like, yeah, but it can't really be the part of, the humans, but it can be being human and doing psychotherapy. So she named it.
So she gave you the idea for that other.
She gave the name. Yeah. And that's why I'm so privileged for being connected to so many people. So many of the stuff I do are actually just a fruit of a conversation that nailed it for me. And that's how I am as a being. That's why I think in that sense, I don't feel like I'm a genius, but I am a genius at really surrounding myself with really supportive people that are able to translate my language to myself. And so that's how that came to be. So now there is humans of Gestalt, being human and doing psychotherapy, and being and doing. But being and doing can be being human and being whatever identity you have.
Wow, the book you mentioned, Risking Being Alive, what a great title. Do you remember who the author is?
It's somewhere behind me, but I can send it. It's actually, again, that's an interesting thing. So I have a group of Gestalt therapists who, one lives in Brazil, the other lives in Australia, and this is a book from an Australian Gestalt, someone who is in an Australian Gestalt community, and it was sent to me from Australia. Thank you, Mark. So yeah, so that's the amazing part of doing all of this. Is like I feel like I am everywhere, from New Zealand to San Diego.
Yeah, no, that is such an amazing thing about the moment in time that we are alive in, and obviously the privileges that we have from where our respective situations in life is that from our homes we can conduct these interviews. And I've talked to people all over the world for my show, and it blows my mind. Like, it continues to blow my mind just to think that this technology is so readily available and accessible in such a way that I can do this. And like, just a very short number of years ago, it would not have been possible. And now it's so doable, and it has opened up my world tremendously. And I just love that we're having this conversation with an 8-hour time difference. And there's so many things I wanted to comment on. Number one,
I want to say a really quick thing. When I think of this, I think of how much we take that for granted, because I lived at the time when I was small, we had power cuts, and we didn't have power for most of the day, except sometime in the morning or something like that. And I'm always thinking, oh my God, like, I don't know if people are aware that this can always appear. And for me, it's kind of such an alive thing that I'm like grateful for every single moment I have to do this. And I'm always thinking, what would happen if I lose my interviews? How can I save them? But it's impossible. It's really impossible to save them except in my being, because like, if there's no electricity, like literally everything, all the work I've done is gone, And I think we take electricity for granted. Like, people think it
takes so much for granted.
So
when we're so increasingly so, this is the case. We're so technology dependent. We would be beyond lost if, as you say, like, all of a sudden the grid were shut down. Like, there's so much, we don't even realize the extent to which we take things for granted. But because you and I we have come from different backgrounds and experiences, but at least, like, for instance, I'm old enough to have known life before the internet. And I'm so grateful, by the way, for that. And it allows me to appreciate things certainly in a deeper way, but also I'm just so grateful to have been able to experience life before cell phones. I mean,
Yes.
And to what you were speaking of earlier in this conversation about just like connectivity with nature, with the rhythms of nature, with the slowing down that's part of that cycle, and how like now we have light. Not only do we have electricity 24/7, so we can do work at all hours of the day and night, which is certainly a mixed blessing, but we have access to the internet 24/7 as if we have a connection. And it's so it's just an overwhelming fire hose of stimulation. And a lot of it, I'm not saying it's, there's a lot of crap, but there's a lot of gold. I mean, it's
so much.
It's endless.
I was anxiety ridden when Facebook stopped. I was like, it stopped, and I was like, where are all of my friends?
For a few hours.
How am I now going to connect to all the people I love? And I mean, I can say many things of, like, why this is wrong, but I mean, if you use it well with consciousness and with awareness, there's so many blessings, and I am really, really grateful to live in this time. Yeah, really.
Oh wow, like I said, there were so many different like thoughts and comments that I wanted to speak to, just that came out of this conversation. Oh, one of them was just like, okay, a couple of them actually. One of them was Derek Sivers, and he's going to be by the time this comes out, I think he's going to be the episode before this one. So Derek Sivers was our point of connection, unknowingly to him. Yeah. But I just love these connections. So for instance, like, you somehow discovered Tim Ferriss, and because of Tim Ferriss's show, you discovered Derek Sivers. And because he says, hey, email me, which he does in every interview I've heard him do. You took him up on that. And because you have a podcast, you got to interview him. And he doesn't do that, by the way. It's a huge honor to both of us that he said yes to us. He does not, anyway. But the point is that when I was preparing for my interview with him, I do a lot of research in general. It's part of it. I kind of love it. I love that part of this. And I stumbled upon the interview that you did with him, and it blew me away. I told you that I listened to a lot of interviews, and the stuff you were able to get out of him was gold. And I just so appreciated it. And I hadn't even done my interview with him yet. And but that's how I found out about your podcast, and then started diving into that, going down that rabbit hole. And I'm just going to point out a few, because your podcast introduced me to people like Robin Posen. Never heard of her. And by the way, she lives not that far from where I live. And she blew me away. I already ordered her book. Daphne Haas-Kogan totally inspired me. Niella Miller, I was just dumbfounded. She's this 86-year-old woman who's like, she's
living in virtual reality.
Living in virtual reality. Like, I was just like, couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe it. And again, I learned from I didn't know I wrote it down, but I don't have the name off the top of my head.
Second Life, I think.
Second Life. Yeah. I didn't even know what that was. I didn't even know that existed. So because of your podcast, now I do. So anyway, those are just a few, but, and now we've gotten the opportunity to connect, and, it's just these amazing connections. And it's why, again, I expressed earlier that the hope is that through my little contribution with this podcast, whomever it may reach and whenever, that maybe it will introduce a new person or idea for someone that will have a huge positive impact on them. And I just love the interconnectivity of all of this, and, the ripple effects.
And actually, I want to add something to that, because you said, like, I don't know what words you use, but like what you've got out of him. And there, I want to just say something about my process there, because I do not, that's how I do therapy as well. And that's how I live life. I was a therapist before I was a therapist, really. But when I enter a conversation, and I don't know if many people think that about me, but when I enter a conversation, I'm genuinely curious. I do not have an expectation of what the person should answer to my question. And I think the places I go in my interviews are probably so deep because there is a level of I don't care where we're going to get with this. Not I don't care, but it's the wrong way of saying it. But I don't want to box you with the questions. And I think because they are so open-ended, I think that's what invites people to go deeper.
So interesting. Yeah.
And I think that's, and to be honest, that's how I was experiencing this evening. So really, thank you for that.
Cool.
But I think that's so also that's the reason I accepted being here, because I could see that you do reflect back on the person's process. You really deeply listen, and then you kind of summarize really what the person has said. And I think when I listened to that, I was like, oh, this feels safe. This feels like I can actually come and someone will not just, I wouldn't be just a number for someone, but like it's like, you really explore that. And I think that's the level of quality, I would say, that I would like to keep, both as a therapist, as an interviewer, as a human being in relationships. And I think many people, because their experience in life is that they have been boxed, they often feel like, oh, I need to give you a certain answer. What do you want me to say? And I think I just want to say and iterate to many people, not for me only, but you don't have to say anything. A conversation is an exploration. We both have no idea what this life is about. I mean, I have like a background on my phone which says, I don't know anything. I'm still on the ride. And I think that it's like, it's that expansion I'm striving for, because I really feel that we are so complex and nature is so complex that we will never exhaust like what, for example, a person I really want to interview who has written an incredible book. It's called The Island of Knowledge. His name is Marcelo Gleiser, if I'm pronouncing well. I'm not sure if I will be able to reach them, but for people who want to know about science and how science works, we don't have the answers before we do the experiments. It would be futile to do experiments if we knew the answers, because that's a job for a factory production. But if we want to actually get to new places, we really need to have these questions that are opening our worldview, not closing it. So that, I think that's the reason why I probably get to those places, is because I'm like, and this, and what about the, and but I guess the experience, and I was certainly like that when we go through trauma, is that we have an idea of how someone expects us to be. And I am sad that some people have to go through that, and then questions about themselves scares them because they don't know where to look inside. And I think that's what I would love people to have. Courage is not the word, because if you have been deeply traumatized, you are still courageous. You're incredibly courageous to be alive and walking. But it's more like to give themselves the permission and support to look at inside, rather than from looking at someone else being like, what do you want me to say?
So the comment you made about science and how you don't have the answers in advance, and that's the whole point. That's how you discover and learn new things, is because you conduct an experiment without knowing the result ahead of time. You could make the same case for art making, is that it's an opportunity to explore something. And if you knew exactly how it was going to come out, you might have an idea of how you a vision for it that gets you started, but then it takes on a life of its own.
Absolutely.
And you never would have arrived there without that same spirit of exploration. And if you did already know every detail in advance, it wouldn't be very satisfying, probably. I mean, maybe there's a certain satisfaction to like being able to realize something that you have inside you and you want to externalize it, you want to get it out there. So that's that's fair.
There's a level of skill which is amazing when you know, oh, I've reached this level of skill that like I can close my eyes, I can imagine this, and it's going to be exactly what I imagined. So that's amazing. And some people have that, or like, you know, some neurodiverse people who can just like have an image and then it extracts so much information. I mean, that's a kind of incredible way of seeing the world. But I want to add something, and that's why it's actually so difficult to fund art and science. And that's why it's so difficult to actually fund innovative
People want to
science.
know what they're going to get for their money. Is that
Exactly? and I mean, I have not yet had the chance to speak to funders. I will probably do if I continue my biomedical science path. But I do wish that funders truly understand the nature, the difficulty of us not being able to deliver, because it can be that I run a 4-year project that costs $500,000 and that goes literally nowhere. And it's a possibility, but if they leave us the space to say this has led literally nowhere, rather than convincing them that this bullshit data is the amazing thing they wanted to see, I think we will do much better quality science. And it's something I'm really, that's a part of me which is still struggling, because it's really hard to do. It's so hard. I mean, we only reward scientists based on their previous successes, which that means we might be losing some scientists that are still really good but haven't had the chance to really get there. And so I actually spoke to this with the philosopher which knows phenomenology, and I really want to interview. He's a scientist at the Crick, and we were talking about, why don't people like you know, the green card lottery, why don't people leave a space for chance? As in, like, you know, you can hire scientists that are, you know, they have already established there, but hire them in 80% of cases, because that will be continuing. They can still come to like new, but give 20% chance to someone that you feel like, I'm not sure if this person will succeed. But this kind of,
that sounds to me like risking being alive.
is risky. Yeah, I mean, I think we really need those calculated risks. That's another part which I'm hoping to
and have them. I like the way you put it, like built into it. So it's like you're buffering it, like there is a certain known quantity, but you're leaving room for something that you're willing to take a risk on. If it doesn't deliver, you'll still, you know that you're getting a certain amount of reliable performance.
Exactly.
But you know, but the potential gains of taking those chances are massive. And if we don't take those chances, even in a very calculated and even in a contained way, like you said, 20% or whatever, then we're potentially really like missing out on a lot.
And in addition to that, I just want to add is, even though you might not get the big thing, you still have built something during the process. And I think many people don't realize that. Like maybe the scientific question was not answered, but maybe the tools have been developed in the process, or people have, like, really great people have been trained. So I think the way we assess at the moment, the way we assess science solely based on output is just hard. I know it's quite difficult. There are no really better ways. We need to do something about it. But I still feel like, yes, and I would like to have more conversations about that.
Yeah, and the way we define success, right? Like in such a limited way that doesn't allow for recognizing the things that can produce future successes or other successes. Like we're not acknowledging those. Yeah. All right. So we do need to wrap this up soon, I think. But first of all, just thank you for this amazing dialogue and conversation. And I love that you know, I certainly did my research and preparation and had some questions prepared, but I just part of what I love about doing this is being present to what comes up and letting it direct us or letting it the conversation kind of lead the way. And you've been amazing in what you've shared, and I just so appreciate that you've taken the time to do this and for everything that you've shared. I am really struck by the diversity of things that you do and are interested in, by the I'm trying to find the right words. You know, we keep coming back to permission, this giving yourself permission to move confidently in the direction towards something that interests you without knowing what's going to come of it. I love that. I think that is such a wonderful characteristic that it would behoove all of us to cultivate, like to just give ourselves that permission to explore things. And but I imagine that because you kind of have like one foot in the art world and one foot in the science world, for just to, you know, come up with simple categories. And clearly all of these things inform each other. When you do a painting, it's going to inform the way you do your research. When you do a podcast, it's going to inform, you know, I just love that, again, that interconnectedness. But I have to ask, just from a pragmatic standpoint, how in the world, this is a sincere question, how do you make time for all of these different pursuits and interests? How do you prioritize? How do you make it work? Because you're doing so many different things that each one of them could be your entire focus.
Job on its own. Yeah. It's a really difficult one to answer because I am really privileged. So it's not knowledge. It's not like I'm super amazingly organized, which I don't want to depreciate myself. I am quite organized, but I think I'm able to do this now because I have had set a solid foundations before. And I think I was developing all of the traits somehow in parallel, but not really like in terms of science. I was developing it for 15 years, and I have protocols that I carry out from every place I've been to. I have quite an organized system to organize my plasmids. People might not know but these are DNA pieces that we use to express proteins. Like I have kind of databases that keep me grounded, that I know where I am at and at any given moment. So I have those structures that support me, that I have. I mean, like, all of my life is organized in folders. I know I have a really good memory of what's where when it happens, so I know quite quickly where to look for it. So those are the things that support me in being able to then. So structure is something I'm actually quite adamant about. People might not think this of me because I'm also quite spontaneous, and but actually I'm spontaneous within a limit of my structuring. Let's put it like that. So I think that's one thing that supports me. Another thing that I feel privileged about is that for example, I had some savings from my from my Swiss PhD. So now when I'm here, I'm not paid nearly enough to be able to live in London, but I am able to order food. So, I don't prepare food. I don't have children. I, at the moment, don't have a partner. So I think those are the things that are maybe suffering at the time, at this time, because I don't spend that time to negotiate needs. Like, I'm quite free in that terms. Like, I'm unbound by someone else's needs. And then I have to actually shout out this to my current boss, because he was quite supportive in me developing some of my other. I mean, within the Crick, we have like 10 days to do developing like some other leadership skills, which I have taken up on. And so within the Crick, we have a little bit of that ability to develop. And the Crick is so well done in that sense that, you have facilities, you have, it's like a lot of the things can be outsourced. And so that's another thing that supports me scientifically, that I have reached this point now that I can. And I know what I need to do. I have a plan, but I can also know which people to involve within the project in a timely manner. So I think that that's another thing that has been building. I probably couldn't do this during my PhD. Although during my PhD, I was doing dancing. I was doing quite a lot of other things. But also, I think that sometimes I overwork as well. So it's definitely not something I'm proud of. So when I was I mean, it's a funny, not funny story, but I think I actually was in my PhD, I was once late for my own lab meeting. And it was late because, I overslept. I had so many obligations. Then I didn't prepare at the time. So I think there was a time where I didn't treat myself well, especially during my PhD. And that's a part of self-care that I'm now developing and trying to understand what's my limit. So there is a piece of that I'm working in a prestigious information institution, which has some systems set in place that I can organize well. And it's kind of working smoothly in that sense. And then I think there is another thing that this, for example, I don't mind. Like, I don't watch Netflix, for example. Like, I binge watch something if I really like it. I do it for one day in a weekend, in like once in 4 months. But it's not something that takes up my time. So I'd rather spend my evening doing this than watching a TV series, for example. So there is something about this being very nourishing for me. So I think in that way, the interviews are basically like food for me rather than taking energy. And honestly, even like sending out the emails, and I sent the hundreds of them basically. Even that doesn't bother me because there is also something like rewarding, like dopamine hit every time you get like this positive response of someone you really wanted to interview. And it's like, oh, this person has recognized me in some way. I have been seen and they value my work. And so there is a bit of that validation, which I think I needed for quite some time. And so I think I'm getting a bit of that validation through my interviews. So I think in that sense, they're not like an energy drain. Yeah. And it's the same for psychotherapy. But then at times I feel, for example, in the last year, my science has suffered. And I know that. I'm quite aware of that. And I'm, again, grateful for my boss who has been supportive during that. So now I've cleared up a lot of my things, my mental space. And now I'm kind of coming back to my science and to like really going forward with the project I'm working on. And so there is a lot of privileges here that are hidden, that are unseen. Working at a Crick is very prestigious. Like having some savings from Switzerland is quite it's a big support. I mean, I earned them, but it's still quite supportive.
Being young and healthy.
Being young and healthy, exactly. Being unburdened by parents who might be sick. They're taking care of themselves. They have their own jobs. I don't feel like I need to. I don't feel like I need. Well, there was a long time I felt like I needed to sustain them, and I still have that fear for a little bit, because again, being in Serbia is economically quite unstable. But there are a lot of things that are supporting me in order for me to be able to do this. And as I said, that's why I say the person I want to be within the capacity I have now, I might not be able to do this in half a year, but I would like to take the chance now when I have the capacity, when I have the possibility, and see where I can go with that. And so yeah, I think that's what helps me. And also I think the way I do things is quite spontaneous and organic. So for example, the painting, I do it once a month for 2 hours with this lady. So that's not a huge investment of time. And then
but it's a commitment that you schedule in. Exactly.
Scheduling is a big thing for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So scheduling is a big thing for me. And then, for example, podcasts. As I said, like I know how many I can do in a certain amount of time. They're nurturing. And then I have someone at the moment who is helping me to do like small clips and like do it the promotion and everything. So I think it's a lot about, and also the way I do them. So, you said you prepare a lot, but I often call people that I already know their work like deeply, just because like I've read everything, like, like Derek, like I was quite, I didn't just call Derek because he's Derek, but it was just really like, I read most of the books. I was like, I listened to the interviews, but I did that before I, so it feels like all of this is now I'm all capable of all of this because I've spent 30 years building up to this moment. To have that capacity, because now I sit in front of a person and I know, like, I have this huge, like, back is back, as one of my teachers would say, like, huge, like, history of knowledge and listening to stuff. And I mean, like, 4 years of experiments in a dark room is like a lot of books and podcasts.
Okay, so you can I don't like the word multitask, but you're mentally free enough while you're doing your work to also be taking in content.
Yes, and that's a privilege as well. Which, because many people, like, they're nurses, for example, they can't do that. Like, their focus has to be so sharp, and if they are 8 hours working, they have to do that for 8 hours. Whereas if I'm splitting cells for 8 hours, yes, I have to be focused. I make a really good plan before I start doing that, and that takes me an hour. But the rest 6 hours of technical work are free, and I have been doing this long enough to be able to then do it. So I think that's, again, a privilege of the type of work I do, because many people, for example, people who worked with tuberculosis, of like level 3 containment, they can't take in their mobile phone with them in that space, and therefore they are much more limited in what they can do within the 8 hours of their work. So I really need to recognize. I mean,
It sounds like you have quite a lot of recognition for the ways in which
I'm
you're
privileged.
Yeah. But at the same time, it's important to acknowledge these sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle choices and decisions also that you make. For instance, like TV, not so nourishing, cut it out, and that frees up time. Making a point, even if you don't do something every day, but making a point, like to say painting is enough of a priority to me that I'm going to insist that for 2 hours at a time, every whatever the interval is, I'm going to schedule it to ensure that it happens. So these are things like of you asserting your agency to fit things in. But you know what I loved that you said is just this idea of, it's so obvious, but paying attention to the things that excite us, that nourish us, to use your word, versus the things that drain us, like what lifts us and what drains us. And when we're doing things that really energize us, then it doesn't feel so much like work. It feels almost like play, maybe.
Yes.
But also we can accomplish, the irony is that we can accomplish a lot more when we're doing things that we're really engaged in and that give us that energize us as opposed to drain our energy. Now, it's possible for something to do both. Like, for instance, I could totally imagine being a psychotherapist, being simultaneously energized and drained by that work.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's actually, it's interestingly, people would have this imagination that it's quite hard to be in a space of someone's pain, but it's so energizing for me, because I know that I think because I had my own experiences of going through something really hard and being on the other side, I know I can hold that hope for some people, some, not all, obviously, but I think there's something deeply energizing in knowing that 1 hour of my attention can mean a world to someone. And I think that is something that I just, because, many times people think therapy is something special and we have all these techniques and blah, blah, blah. But I mean, I have a quote on my screensaver. I something along the lines that people come to therapy to change, but ultimately what they want is to be understood, something along those lines. And I think that that's, again, like, there's a bit of a misconception of what therapy is. And yes, there are some things that I think that, we need to work with. They're hard and challenging, but I think it's just so amazing to know that just one's listening attention can make like a world of difference for a person. And sometimes that, like most of therapy is actually that, and I don't think
And you
we
don't,
acknowledge that.
I think it's important to say, not to diminish the value of the training that you're getting at
Oh,
all.
absolutely not. No.
No, but what you just said is, and to that point, is that you don't have to be a trained therapist to provide that for another human being. Just by showing an interest and paying attention and holding space for another
Yeah.
person is immensely therapeutic and healing.
Yeah.
Where it can take place in your home, it can take place,
Yeah.
like it doesn't have to be couched in the frame of therapy. So many things are therapeutic that aren't
Yes.
officially, you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I
Like
mean,
what music did for me growing up
yes,
was so therapeutic.
absolutely.
And
Yeah.
you know, but I didn't pay a therapist to say, today we're going to listen to, you know,
Yes. Yeah.
so
And there is, I mean, it's thank you for also reminding me of this other side, because the necessity of training, and some things can't be solved by a simple conversations, and we need techniques, and we need what I'm trained to do. We need trauma awareness. We need to know how to work with trauma. So I don't want to diminish that, because complex PTSD is a thing.
sure. And there's
And
there's a skillful way to attend to someone.
Exactly. And I mean, I think what's giving the skillful part is, and what I'm like really like as a therapist, or like trainee therapist, is having different maps. And the more maps from which we can, like the bigger the multidimensionality that we can like speak to a human being, the more we can borrow to them those maps. And I think that is a part, because like no map is perfect, no psychotherapeutic endeavor, I don't know, model, yeah, is perfect. But the more of them we have, the more some of them will resonate with someone to really find their own words of the horror within. Because often after difficult experience, what we are left with is the horror that stays of that experience. It's not the experience itself, it's just what stays afterwards. And I think those are the things that, you know, we
that's
as
the trauma.
therapists,
Yeah, that they say, it said that the trauma is not the wound, it's the response to the wound, right? Like
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that can linger forever. I mean, like that can go on right? Like well beyond the initial wound.
Exactly. And I think there is, I mean, you know, to what Derek was saying, well, history doesn't exist, but yes, it does, as well, as in like so many things are trapped in our bodies as a memory. And there are really delicate, skillful ways of working with that. And that's why I'm really a believer of therapy, to be honest. I probably wouldn't do this if I wasn't. And again, I know its limitations, as well as, like, you know, I do family constellations, which are like they're like another modality, not necessarily of therapy, because they don't call it therapy. But I know that, you know, if sometimes family constellations can also be quite like, you know, you, as if like you take psychedelics, but if you don't have anyone to integrate that properly, it can be as destabilizing as well.
You froze up just I want to just not miss what you froze up for a moment on my end. So you were saying that the family constellation experience, without the facilitation, without the sort of processing afterwards, could be as destabilizing as taking psychedelics without doing it in a proper set and setting, right? So what did you say after that? Because you froze up.
I said I am quite attuned and astute to the limitations of every tool I'm using, including science, because I think in this day and age, you know, we use a science as like, if science doesn't says this, that your experience then doesn't matter, because like science hasn't approved this. And I think we need to be very mindful of whatever tool we use. Like, you know, people love mindfulness. Mindfulness can be devastating for people with complex PTSD. It can be horrible. So I think we need to know that everything has its place, and it's about how a different person would react to a different thing. And so that's why I really appreciate you mentioned this about psychotherapy, because there is skillfulness, there is knowledge. And, you know, just today I had a discussion with my supervisor, and I think I think knowledge is important. I think knowledge is important, and people who have and harbor and hold knowledge, they shouldn't be an authority of, it should still be a dialogue. But it's like, well, 15 years of experience in something is just not the same as someone who is just entering. And so it's something that we need to appreciate, but how you bring that is what we can work with. And so I think, and actually one thing I wanted to say, because you, there was something about, I don't remember where it came, but it just reminded me of this authority. Yeah.
Yeah.
So my Aleksandra teacher technique, my Aleksandra technique teacher, she has this incredible thing which she always says, our head, the way we hold ourselves, is like, how are we an authority for ourselves? So to author something is what authority is. And that, like, the word author and authority was something that was not connecting to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what we, talking about self-agency, what we do have the power to do is to constantly rewrite our stories, to be the authors of our stories, because that's something that no one can take us away. And I think that's what liberated me as well, when I watched the Maid, when she speaks about no one can take your words away from you. And I think it's so important to allow ourselves to create and constantly create and recreate our stories from within in conversations, and also be kind of mindful of what are the words that people give us without us really fully like metabolizing them, but just taking them in as they are. And I think it's so important for people to have that agency to question, to be like, you know, you said this about me, but do I really want to take it? Do I really want to take it as me? Or can we explore this between us? What did you mean when you said that? How? Like, you know, you don't need to take it. And it's something I had to learn in the hard way.
Well, yeah, because ultimately, like it or not, we are our own authority. We are, you know, like, we are the authority of our lives, because we know, for instance, what works for us or what doesn't work for us. And so it doesn't matter what outside authorities say. Ultimately, we are the authority of our life. And so therefore we have to assume authorship of our lives. Yeah, you're on mute. You muted yourself.
I
okay.
muted because there was a sound.
Oh, there was a sound. That's okay. I like that. I like getting the realism in there.
Yeah.
Oh, well, you know, Aleksandra, again, it's amazing how much time has passed. It's been just a total joy to have this conversation with you. And you already answered what is usually my last question about you. You know, you spoke very well to the person that you want to be now. And I loved your answer. And also, I just wanted to, do have one more final question, but before I get to that, I just wanted to reflect a little bit about trade-offs. And when I was asking you about how do you fit all of these things in, and you mentioned that your science was suffering for a bit, and you're recalibrating. And that's something we're always doing, hopefully with some intentionality, because life is a juggling act, and there is a time and season for sometimes going all in on something and neglecting other things, and other times being more balanced. But there's a time and a place, and every situation inherently has trade-offs. So you know, like, whether you're single, whether you're married, whether you have kids, whether you don't have kids, whether you're employed or not employed, whatever the circumstances, there are inherent trade-offs to it. And the challenge, I think, in life is to embrace what is beneficial about this moment, because this moment is going to change. It already has. Now it's this moment, but like, you know, in the midst of a specific situation, if we can have the presence to appreciate the upside of it and the advantages of it, and really embrace them and take advantage of them. And the easiest way, I think, to do that is to understand and constantly remind yourself that this too shall pass, and I'll be in a new situation, and it will have its own pros and
beauties.
Cons. Yeah. So, you know, it's good to be intentional and conscious, but also sometimes we have to be adaptable to what we were discussing earlier. Okay, so my last question, Aleksandra, is a question I learned from you in your podcast and the Humans of Gestalt podcast, which I somehow really didn't think to ask people. And that is simply, is there a question that I haven't asked you that you would like me to ask you, or that you would like to respond to? Anything else that you would like to speak to, add, or comment on?
I think it was really exhaustive. Really, I really felt, I think I gave myself the permission to speak this much very consciously, but I think I knew that you are the person I can do this with. But I really, I don't really feel like I want to add something, and I really appreciate. I just appreciate the amount of space you've given me to speak. I mean, one thing I never speak about, and I don't know why, but like the fascination of the science work I do, because not like, I speak of therapy, but I never speak about telomeres, or like I never speak about DNA damage response. And I don't necessarily need to go into that, but I just want to say how fascinated I am by the way nature works. And how telomeres are like these repetitive DNA sequences at the ends of our chromosomes, which have evolved because the chromosome has been circular, then it opened up, and then because when something breaks in the cell, we have these sirens that are like the siren you just heard. They just like go straight away. They're super fast. They just go to the place, and then they bring it back into a circle. But now, when you make a chromosome, which is not circular anymore, it's open, it looks like your DNA is constantly broken. So basically, now you have a new problem to solve, which is how do you say to your, to your cell that this is actually not something you need to fix back, but you need to keep it open. And if it happens in the middle of a chromosome, then you need to fix it, because then it's a problem. So then we needed to evolve these telomeres to actually say, look, like I will now bind this repetitive sequence, almost like, protect it. And actually there is a protein complex which binds there, and it's called shielding. But now when you protect this, then you create a new sorts of problem, which is like, it's difficult to replicate. You can't really if something happens to these proteins, then you have a really big problem in the cell. So you need to and so what I love about nature is that every solution creates a new problem. Every solution creates a new problem, and it's quite amazing to kind of have like an experiential feel of that. And as I said, like I'm in love with telomeres. I worked with them in my PhD. I'm continuing to somehow work on them. I love the DNA damage response, and I just I'm fascinated by the work I do. And I rarely speak about that, because the longest time it took me to call myself something is a scientist, and even to this day, I don't feel like I'm a scientist enough. And that's a really interesting thing, because I still feel in the science world, I don't allow myself, or I haven't managed to validate myself as a scientist. And if for example, I don't know what's going to be of my career, but if I don't become what people call principal investigator, or I don't have my own lab, I'm not sure if I'm going to see myself as a successful scientist, which is a very sad thing, because I really love science.
And would you hold other people to that standard? Like, would you say, you wouldn't?
No.
So that's important to recognize, right?
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't judge someone else. You're not a PI,
Yeah.
you're not a real scientist. Or, right?
No.
So I'm just pointing that out. Like,
it's true, but it's so present in the field. I mean, I have held those judgments a few years back.
Yeah.
I would probably not have called someone a scientist who has gone from, from the scientific environment to the industry. Now I'm like much more aware of the world, and I am not doing that. But I think when was the first time I actually called myself a scientist, although I have been doing science before 10 years before that, was when I was passing the border to come to England, and they ask you what you do. And it was the first time I said I'm a scientist. And I think that's the reason I don't speak about my science, because I think, and there is like a bit of inadequacy. I never think it's good enough, especially like now, because like, as I said, it has taken a bit of a backseat because of, the therapy, but also some difficulties. And I think I really felt like I haven't, I feel like always failing and always inadequate, like almost like an imposter. And the sad part about that, I think, it's also like the scientific world is also breeds that a little bit.
The culture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I'm really struggling. So actually, like, people might think, oh, like, everything's perfect for me and I'm doing all these amazing things, but actually it's something I'm really struggling with, because I just do not want to lose my scientific identity, but I feel like it's somehow slipping away. And I don't know, I think I believe in myself that I probably will eventually, like, come back to it in a different way. But it's just because, as I said, like, it's very result oriented culture. It's very difficult to predict whether I will have simply the serendipity. I just said the Serbian word, by the way, but the serendipity to actually continue, because it's a
Right.
lot about serendipity.
Yeah,
It's a lot
and that's not all within your
within
control.
my control.
So I think
Exactly.
it comes back. I think
Yeah.
if we had to sum this entire now 3-hour long conversation
Yeah.
down to a single word, for me, I think it would be permission.
Yeah.
And how it applies here is to, regardless of what the outside world does to you or
Yeah.
says about you, it's about giving yourself permission to own these parts of you and declare them as such, and to be able to say, I am a scientist, and whether I get this particular grant, whether I'm given this particular title, whether I get this particular
Yeah.
project, those things are not all within my control, but they also are not the metric that deems me. I'm the one that has the authority to declare
Yeah.
myself a scientist because of my love for science and because of my willingness to engage in it. That's
Yeah,
how I see it.
exactly. No, I'm grateful for that reflection. But yeah, thank you. Actually, this was another thing I haven't said in many podcasts, so it's any. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Aleks. Like I said, it's total pleasure to connect with you. And where I'm going to include in the show notes links to anything that you would like me to. But just to close this out, where can people go to connect with you or learn more about you?
So I think the best way is the Being and Doing YouTube page. I mean, I do have a website. It's quite trashy, but like you can find it.
And I'll link to it. I'll link to it.
Yeah. I mean, the Being and Doing YouTube page has also the links. It has my email. It has the Instagram links, and yeah, I think that's basically it. So if you type Being and Doing in my name, because I think I'm not there yet that Being and Doing is recognized as the
Well,
podcast. Yeah, so I think
it's a
Being and
broad
Doing
search term. Yeah.
exactly. And on Instagram is being not slash, but the lower, how do you call that?
Oh, underscore.
So being underscore and underscore doing. So Instagram is like the place I kind of spend the most time. And then, yeah, and the podcast is also on Spotify. So I think all those, I mean, I will link to everything, but yeah, probably the best entrance is Instagram.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you again so much, Aleks.
Thank you. I mean, it was just been wonderful. Thank you for the space, for the time, for everything.
My pleasure.